101. Wrath of the Golden Lion, Marineford. The maritime fortress called Absolute Justice, built of towering white stone and iron, lay under a blanket of heavy gloom. Not a breath of sea air stirred. The heat hung thick and close, stifling and humid, like a waterlogged sponge pressing at everyone's chest. With the execution of the Pirate King, Roger, only hours away, no one could say for certain that nothing unexpected would happen. The crescent-shaped harbor cradled the massive fortress. Buildings clustered tightly together, and a tide of marine cloaks flowed across the parade grounds in precise, practiced ranks. It looked like a scene of absolute order, but beneath that surface there was tautness and unease. "Hey, did you hear? Not only us, lots of those CP guys are here today, too." "Shut up, you want to be locked up?" Patrols quickened their pace, eyes sharp. The usual training shouts were few and farther between. Far above the plaza, on the spire of a distant clock tower, Kyle sat alone, still and watchful, like a lone, proud falcon. He stared out over the harbor, where a forest of masts jutted into the sky and marine soldiers patrolled the city walls like ants. The idea of forcing his way in flickered across his mind for a heartbeat, then he laughed it off. Storming Marineford alone, descending like some divine warrior and shaking the place to its core, would be intoxicating. But it wasn't rational. He was strong, yes, but not foolish enough to believe he could overturn all of Marineford by himself. Even if he cut his way through and took vice admirals and rear admirals down one by one, men like Garp, Sengoku, and even Kong would converge and overwhelm him. The smartest play was to see what unfolded and slip away cleanly. That plan was too safe to be satisfying. What he needed was a teammate, someone who would draw the lion's share of the fire, someone outrageously conceited. The sort of perfect target who would make the Marines come running. Kyle swung his legs idly and let his gaze settle on the massive building at the center of the fortress. The word Marine carved across its facade. "You'll come, won't you, Golden Lion?" he muttered, a grin curling at the thought. No sooner had he spoken than the sky darkened, as if answering his call. It wasn't the slow gathering of storm clouds. This was a purer, almost tangible shadow. Vast curtains of gloom, like drapery left behind by gods, rolled across the heavens and blanketed most of Marineford. Everyone looked up. Patrols halted mid-step, training shouts died on the air, and the men moving supplies on the docks froze. Then the thick canopy of cloud was ripped open with violent force. Something enormous pushed through the tier and bloomed into view. Several titans, each slowly squeezing through the rent sky. They were islands, whole islands suspended overhead. The undersides of the floating masses showed ragged layers of rock and packed soil. Trees clung upside down to the roots, stubborn and tenacious. Chunks of stone and dust toppled and skittered down, whispering and clattering like a fragment of some collapsing heaven from an old myth. "It's a lie." A young Marine's lips trembled. His rifle clattered from numb fingers to the ground. "What in the world is that?" "Islands. Islands are falling from the sky." Panic spread like wildfire. Then, over that rising chaos, a wild, unrestrained voice rolled across the air like thunder, reverberating through all of Marineford. "Sengoku!" "Garp! I'm here. Hand over Roger." Perched on the clock tower, Kyle let a satisfied smile spread across his face. He'd been waiting for this. Golden Lion Shiki, the man most worthy of a target in this world, had finally arrived. Before anyone could react, Shiki struck. He gave the Marines no time to breathe. Before his words were even finished, several mountain-sized chunks of rock tore free from the nearby cluster of floating islands. They ripped through the atmosphere, igniting into roiling crimson fireballs with long trailing tails, and came crashing down toward the Fortress's central plaza. The devastation arrived in an instant. Only then did the alarm cut through the sudden stillness, a shrill, piercing wail that echoed across the entire stronghold. "Enemy attack!" the call rang out. "There is only one enemy, the great pirate Golden Lion Shiki. All personnel, maximum combat readiness." Figures launched into the sky. Soru, they stepped on the air, moving so fast they seemed like ghosts, afterimages trailing in their wake as they raced to intercept the falling behemoths. "Rankyaku wolves!" shouted a burly vice admiral with a seagull-shaped hairstyle. He was the first to strike. His legs blurred into phantom afterimages as he kicked so fast the air itself seemed to tear. Dozens of solid blue slashing waves sprang from the motion, weaving together into a rippling net that closed around one of the colossal rocks. On the other side, a lean vice admiral with corded forearms inhaled, pressing 2 fingers together until his knuckles whitened. "Shigan, rapid fire!" he barked. His arms became a flurry of after images as his fingertips jabbed out in a blur. Each strike sent out dense, concentrated shockwaves that found the weak spots in the second rock with surgical precision. Boom! Rumble. The enormous boulders were ripped apart mid-air. The slashing net shredded one into a million fragments, while the other was peppered with holes by the relentless Shigan before detonating in a thunderous blast. Debris rained down, clattering across the fortress's stout buildings and the parade ground, kicking up clouds of dust and smoke. New recruits were struck by falling rubble, shrieking as they tumbled to the hard stones. But that was only the beginning. "Too slow! Too slow! Marine brats!" someone taunted, laughter cutting through the din. "Show me some real skill." Golden Lion laughed, voice heavy with derision. The floating islands above shuddered as more than a dozen objects, meteors of various sizes, whistled down, spraying destruction across an even wider swath than before. This time the target was blatant, the residential districts and the fortress's logistical port. Marineford was instantly carved into a sea of fire and chaos. "Quick, protect the civilian sectors," someone barked. "Medical teams, get ready. Artillery, prepare, aim for the sky and fire." On the city walls, a line of colossal cannons finally found their bearings and thundered. Cannonballs trailed fiery tails as they screamed upward. But as they neared the floating islands, an invisible force warped their paths. Shells spun off course and detonated harmlessly in midair, blooming into useless fireworks. "It's no use," cried a bespectacled officer. "That's the power of the Fuwa no Mi. Long-range artillery can't hit them." A thin drizzle began to fall, then swelled into a sudden downpour. The rain snuffed out smaller fires, sending columns of white smoke rising from the wreckage and making the burning streets steam in the chill. Blood and mud mixed into grimy rivulets that ran through the cracks between the plaza's flagstones. Shiki, known as the Golden Lion, hovered 3 feet above the ground, suspended in the eye of the chaos. Rain plastered his golden hair to his forehead. Droplets traced down his arrogant face, but did nothing to cool the blaze of rage in his eyes. In his hands he held 2 famed swords, Sakura Ten and Kareki. "Stop him!" a marine captain roared, raising his saber and charging. Shiki didn't bother to look at him. He took a casual step forward. Shockwave. With a lazy, effortless swing, an invisible arc flashed from Shiki's blade and swept across the square. The captain and the entire rank of marines behind him froze as if time had stuttered. Then crimson geysers burst from their waists. They screamed and collapsed into puddles of blood. "Monster," someone breathed. The surviving marines stared as if they'd seen a specter, fear widening their eyes, their feet scrambling backward on instinct. Shiki's mouth twisted into a grin as rain spattered his blades. "Thief! Ha ha!" His laugh rang out, cold and triumphant, cutting through the patter of the rain as the plaza fell into a tense, terrified silence. "Are you scared already?" Shiki's laugh cut harshly through the rain. "Is the Marine's justice really this pathetic?" Like a specter, the Golden Lion surged into the ranks. Sakura Ten and Kareki whirled around him, 2 cyclones of steel and death. He didn't bother with flashy techniques, only the most elemental brutality, slashes, cuts, stabs, thrusts. Each swing of his blades felled men with ruthless precision. Each turn of his body carved a widening path of carnage. The Marines' formation, once disciplined, tore open like paper, leaving a yawning breach. Swordlight flashed, blood sprayed, and screams braided with the sound of the rain until they were indistinguishable. In moments, a small mountain of corpses and broken weapons lay heaped beneath his feet. Shiki stood on that pile, looking down at the hell he had wrought, but there was no exultant smile on his face, only an abyssal, scorching anger. Rain rinsed the blood from the stones, but he seemed not to notice. "Roger," he murmured, his voice carrying over the wind and rain, sharp enough to slice through the noise. "How could you pathetic fools possibly capture him?" He lifted his head in an instant. His eyes flashed like lightning as they swept across the marine officers standing nearby, ready but unwilling to step forward. His voice climbed, thunder breaking free. "He is the man I acknowledge." At that moment, two distinct, overwhelmingly powerful presences rolled in from the direction of the main fortress. One figure struck the far end of the plaza like a fired cannonball, slamming down so hard the ground shivered. The newcomer wore the mantle of justice and had short hair shot through with black and white, none other than the marine hero, Monkey D. Garp. The other arrival was more restrained, round-rimmed glasses, measured steps, an air of authority. Sengoku, the future fleet admiral, stepped forward. "Shiki," Sengoku barked, stern and uncompromising. "Have you done enough damage? This is no place for you to run wild." "Oh," came the single casual word in reply, cutting through the storm like a blade. "Finally, two halfway decent men have arrived," Golden Lion sneered, his grin flat with cruelty. "Sengoku, Garp, hand over Roger." Sengoku's reply was cold and absolute, each word like a gavel. "Roger is the Pirate King. He has already beaten you, Shiki, in title and in result." The smile drained from Golden Lion's face. It snapped into something feral. "Pirate King? So what?" he bellowed, his anger shaking the small wheel-shaped crown that sat on his head. "If only he'd been willing to help me back then." His voice broke with a sudden desperate fury. "We would have ruled the whole world." For a heartbeat he looked lost in a fevered memory, eyes rimmed red. "Even if he was my enemy, I lived through an age with him. If he's here, bring him to me. Now." He jabbed a finger at Sengoku and Garp, leaving no room for refusal. "If he's to die, I'll kill him myself." Garp finally spoke, and when he did, the familiar twinkle of the old man's sense of justice was gone. He shrugged off his mantle as if setting it aside in the face of this new reality. "Roger's death would make every rampant pirate in the world bow," he said quietly, almost casually. Sengoku stepped forward, his face hardening into a stern mask. A ferocious aura rolled off him as he spoke, "So don't even think about interfering with the execution." "Thief! Ha!" Golden Lion's laugh exploded into the air, full of fury, rattling the floating islands overhead until they thrummed. "Then you two will join Roger in his grave." "Lion's threat, Earth Scroll," he roared. He drove his twin swords down into the mound of corpses at his feet. An invisible force erupted outward. With him as the focal point, the entire plaza, paving slabs and enormous stone blocks alike, was torn up as if it were a soft carpet. The ripped-up stone, contorted, and reformed into several roaring, colossal stone lions that urged straight at Garp and Sengoku. Chapter 102, Wind and Rain. Clear the way. Facing the roaring, giant stone lions, Garp didn't bother to change his stance. He simply took a casual step forward and, aiming at the gaping maw of the nearest beast, threw a single, effortless punch. The impact landed with a dull, bone-stopping thud. Hairline cracks spidered out from the lion's head, racing across its massive stone face. In seconds, those cracks spidered over the entire body, and with a thunderous crash, the lion shattered, turning into a blizzard of rubble and dust that the wind tore apart and scattered across the sky. The force of it barely seemed to faze Garp. Beside him, Sengoku formed a tight hand seal and thrust his palm forward. A golden, circular shockwave burst from his hands and grew rapidly, pushing into the driving wind until it engulfed the remaining stone lions. Under that invisible, overwhelming pressure, the roaring creatures slammed into an unseen barrier. Their movements froze, then they trembled violently and began to crumble away, inch by inch, until nothing remained. Garp threw back his head and laughed, booming over the clearing. "Zeha!" "As expected of you two," Golden Lion laughed instead of scowling. He sprang up, his twin blades wreathed in fierce haki, and surged forward. "Now this is getting interesting." "Lion, rend valley!" he cried. Swordlight braided itself into an impenetrable net and snapped shut around Garp and Sengoku. Garp hurled himself into the breach, his fists hardened by intense armament haki. Sengoku's form began to swell and glow with a radiant gold, reshaping into a colossal Buddha. "Don't look down on us, Shiki," they answered in kind. Boom, boom. Rumble. In the very center of Marineford, the three legendary heavyweights met in a raw, brutal collision. Iron and blades smashed together with earth-shattering force. Each blow unleashed a deafening roar. Shockwaves and flying slashes fanned outward, gouging deep, seemingly bottomless furrows into the already ruined plaza. The surrounding buildings looked as if titans had gnawed at them, their walls cracking and collapsing in an unending cascade. The marine officers and generals could only watch. There was nothing they could do to stop it. They could only pull the surviving Marines back from the outskirts, and at the same time try to form a defensive line to hold off whatever destructive aftershock the battle would throw at them. This is the battlefield from the legends. A young rear admiral fought to keep his footing against the surging gusts, his face pale with horror. Even standing well away from the center, he felt a tremor run through his chest as if his very organs were shaking. All personnel below the rank of Vice Admiral, fall back immediately. This is not a fight for you. Vice Admiral Tsuru said, her voice steady as she issued the order. Her eyes did not leave the three indistinct figures standing in the middle of the ruined plaza. Her expression was grim and utterly serious. The scale and intensity of the fighting far outstripped anyone's expectations. As if the sky itself were reacting, the rain suddenly intensified. What had been a light drizzle moments before became a torrent. Heavy drops smashed into the shattered stone, sending up sprays of muddy water that mixed with the blood darkening the ground. A fierce wind drove the rain in sheets, blurring the contours of the world until everything beyond the immediate area looked like a watercolor washed in gray. Ziha! Golden Lion laughed as he floated in the downpour, his twin blades a blur. The rain couldn't even touch him. It slid away from the whirling swords. What better stage to finish off legends than a storm like this? Garp, Sengoku, let the storm drown out your era. Before he finished, he spun. Two massive flying slashes, charged with wind and thunder, cut out to the left and right. Sengoku, in the form of a golden Buddha, stood solemn and composed. He lifted a single hand. Impact wave. A golden halo rippled outward and shattered one of the slashes cleanly in midair. The other was met head-on by Garp. Fist bone. No flashy flourishes, just one punch, shrouded in pitch-black hockey. Boom. The collision between blade and fist tore a hollow through the rain curtain. Countless droplets vaporized into a choking white mist. A pale bolt of lightning sliced the sky, throwing the three figures into stark relief, gods or demons, while thunder rolled like the heavens itself reacting to the clash. The wind howled, rain lashed down, and thunder split the sky. Marineford had been transformed into an apocalyptic scene. But what unnerved everyone more than the storm was the harbor itself. The sea, which at first had only been restless from the aftermath of battle, was now being tossed as if by some invisible giant hand. It raged with an unnatural violence. Sudden walls of water rose several meters high and slammed to the breakwaters with earth-shaking crashes. Warships at anchor rolled like leaves in a gale. Their mooring lines creaked and groaned as if they would snap at any moment. What's going on? The current. It's completely gone mad. A Marine colonel in charge of vigilance shouted, staring in horror at the bizarre surf. This was no ordinary weather. The water seemed to have a will of its own, roaring as if in fury. As everyone's attention swung between the sea and the central battlefield, a Marine on a high lookout tower blinked and rubbed his eyes, having spotted something that made his jaw drop. He lifted his binoculars and trained them on the entrance to the churning bay. The lens of his scope shook, rain smearing everything into a gray blur. But he saw it. Out on the boiling, pitch-black sea, a figure was walking. The waves that should have thrown men and ships into the deep surprisingly went meek. Wherever his foot fell, the water coalesced into a solid step, holding him up. As he lifted his foot, the step silently dissolved back into the churning surf. The surrounding swells that could have capsized a warship, calmed as they neared him and parted on their own, leaving a perfectly still corridor across the ocean. He strode through gale and thunder, across the raging waters, utterly indifferent to the storm, heading straight for the maritime fortress mired in chaos and battle. Boom! Crack! A lightning bolt tore the sky, and in that flash everyone watching could see him clearly. A black and gold naginata was slung across his back. He wore a plain black trench coat. Tall and upright, his face betrayed no emotion. Only his golden pupils, bright against the storm-dark sky, burned with a terrible intensity. 103. Sasi ignored Dana, hockey. A lone figure walked over the waves toward the fortress, and wherever he stepped, the sea seemed to submit. The torrential rain continued to scour every inch of the stronghold, lashing at Golden Lion, Garp, and Sengoku alike, yet it simply bypassed him. An invisible barrier split the downpour, carving out a perfectly dry space around him. The rainwater slid away along an unseen curve, not a single drop daring to wet his clothes, as if the world itself made way for him. The sight froze the chaotic battlefield. Bloodied Marines at the front, commanders and officers watching from afar, every gaze snapped to the man who defied the storm. His arrival stole the spotlight even from the shocking clash of the three legendary powerhouses. Who is that? He's walking on the raging sea. Is he a devil fruit user? It's him, a Marine rear admiral stammered, voice trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. Wave Motion King Aaron Kale. The name hit the camp like a spark dropped into boiling oil, setting off an immediate uproar. Why is he here? I thought the world government revoked his bounty and declared him neutral. At Marineford, of all places, what does he want? One golden lion was already more than enough. Now another monster shows up. Panic and despair spread faster than the cannon smoke. Dozens of faces turned as one, dread and suspicion mingling in their expressions, all fixed on the lone figure striding across the stormy water. He didn't seem to notice the stares. Calm and unhurried, he cut through the chaos at the edge of the fray and walked straight toward the battlefield's center. The three who had been fighting immediately fell silent. Garp slowly lowered his raised fist. The black sheen of his armament hockey faded from his hand. When he recognized the newcomer as Kale, his features tightened into a look that was anything but simple. Sengoku, now a towering golden great Buddha, halted his attack. The enormous Buddha head turned slightly, its burnished eyes fixed on Kale with an unblinking vigilance written across its solemn face. Thief! Ha! Golden Lion Shiki's wild laughter shattered the brief silence. He hovered in midair, eyes gleaming with raw excitement. I knew it! Kale! His voice had the exhilaration of someone who'd found a kindred spirit, a dark curiosity threaded through every syllable. Are you here for Roger too? Kale finally stopped. He stood at the rim of the ruined battlefield, facing them from a distance, a tense three-way standoff. He ignored the piercing gazes of Garp and Sengoku and lifted only his head to look up at the Golden Lion. There was no hostility in his golden pupils, only a smirk of mockery and something buried deeper, pity. It's been a long time, Shiki, Golden Lion. Kale's voice was calm. Sengoku could no longer contain himself. What do you two think you're doing at Marineford? He bellowed, his words resonating like a great bell from his Buddha form and setting the air humming. Garp said nothing. He simply watched Kale in silence, his expression dark and unreadable. Kale clenched his fist, then let it fall open slowly. This is no place for you, he said. His gaze skimmed past the Golden Lion and settled on Garp and Sengoku. The playful expression that had hung on his face faded, replaced by a severity they had never seen before. Then, using his devil fruit power to send an encrypted message, he spoke directly to them. I will not interfere with Roger's execution. His voice was calm and clear, but carried an unmistakable weight. After everything is finished, I will collect his body and see that he is buried. Garp and Sengoku froze. They exchanged a look of stunned disbelief and a shared, helpless frustration. Of course they wanted their old rival, the man they had spent their lives pursuing, to be given a dignified end. But how could they fight what the world government had already decreed? The highest orders had been issued. Gol D. Rogers' corpse was to be paraded before the world after the execution, a deliberate humiliation and a cold political statement meant to deter every pirate who might be tempted to rise. Garp's fist clenched so hard his knuckles cracked. Anger surged up from his chest, threatening to burst the dam of his reason. He and Roger had loved and killed one another for decades, rivals who understood each other better than anyone, friends who secretly treasured one another. To have Roger denied even the peace of death, to have his body paraded like a trophy, hurt more than the killing itself. But what could he do? Garp was a Marine hero. Behind him were countless sailors and civilians who relied on him. The weight of justice on his shoulders pressed down until he could barely breathe. Sengoku, too, sank into a heavy silence. He knew politics better than Garp. He understood the stakes, the corruption beneath the surface, and that some tides could not be turned. Kale had asked them to openly defy the highest will of the world government. That was a step neither of them could take. Their silence was the only answer they could give. Kale watched them quietly, reading the suppressed fury and helplessness on Garp's face and the tight, solemn resolve in Sengoku's brow. The last flicker of hope in his eyes slowly sank and went cold, like a light swallowed by a dark, bottomless sea. He'd only wanted an excuse to make a scene at Marineford, never imagined they'd even deny him that last scrap of dignity. Of course, he'd said it half in jest. He'd make a scene even if they let him. Heh. A faint sneer slipped across Kale's lips. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand and closed his fingers around the hilt of the black and gold naginata strapped to his back. The blade slid free with a clean clang that cut through the roar of wind, rain, and distant thunder. Inch by inch the dark metal came clear, a cold light running along its edge that seemed to swallow the surrounding gloom. Kale looked up, a dangerous smile curling his mouth. It held no warmth, only a hard, absolute cold and a single, unwavering purpose. Chapter 104. You and I join forces to overthrow Marineford. Say, ha! Golden Lion Shiki's wild laughter cracked like thunder, slicing through the howling wind and driving rain. He glanced at the black and gold naginata he had drawn, then at the cold, resolute expression on Kyle's face. His eyes flared with the feverish joy of finding a kindred spirit. I knew it. You're just like me, down deep. He threw his arms wide as if to embrace the war-torn world around them. Enough with the formalities. You and I, join forces right here, right now, and tear down this hypocritical tomb called justice. He leveled his famed sword, Sakura Ten, at Garp and Sengoku across the battlefield, his voice tipping into manic glee. Those two troublesome old men are mine. The rest of these marine scumbags, from officers to grunts, will be your appetizer. How about it? Before he finished speaking, a savage, violent aura burst from the Golden Lion. His golden-red conqueror's haki rolled outward in all directions like a tangible, seething tide. The plaza's paving groaned under the weight of it, fissures spidering outward. The air thickened until it felt like viscous glue. Before they could even cry out, countless Marines went rigid, eyes rolling back, foam at their mouths, then collapsed unconscious. Above them, hundreds of justice cloaks were swept away like wheat in a hurricane, falling in great swathes. Shiki, you bastard! Sengoku bellowed, his Buddha form flaring with golden light as he and Garp unleashed their auras to resist the oppressive force. It was only a prelude. The next instant, an even deeper, vaster will descended. Black and gold haki poured from Kyle like a star-strewn sky, silently blanketing the battlefield. The domain settled over them, boundless, profound, an absolute will intent on stripping everything away. Within that field, the golden-red aura fought like a tide against a dam, instantly quelled, driven back, and quietly devoured. If Golden Lion's haki was the roar of a king of beasts echoing through the mountains, then Kyle's haki was the aura of a god, presiding over everything with a single indifferent glance. Golden Lion threw back his head and laughed. Ha ha ha! Fascinating! Too fascinating! Shock hardened into exhilaration in his eyes. So you're a monster of this caliber. The invisible pressure rolled back over the plaza, wave after wave. The Marine officers who had somehow held consciousness under Golden Lion's onslaught now found themselves staring at a still greater terror. Sounds, the thunder, the patter of rain, seemed to recede. The world in front of them tilted and swayed. A raw, primal fear, older than thought itself, clawed at their chests. Even Vice Admiral Tsuru and a handful of young figures in the crowd who would one day be famous across the seas could only grit their teeth and force themselves to stay upright, cold sweat already soaking their hair. Damn it, Garp muttered, his knuckles cracking as he clenched his fists. Garp took in the grim sight, unconscious Marines strewn across the plaza, and before him, two titans who treated Marineford as nothing more than a plaything. Fury surged through him. Things had already spun out of control. Either of those two alone could overturn the seas, and now they had joined forces. Sengoku, stop Shiki, he roared without hesitation. He slammed his boot into the ground, stones shattered and flew up in all directions. He didn't charge the Golden Lion. Instead, he tore toward Kyle, the more unpredictable variable he had to neutralize first. The Golden Lion laughed wildly and suddenly stood between them. Your opponent is me, Garp! He shouted. Sakura Ten and the withered tree twisted into a lethal tornado and met the Marine hero's iron fist head-on. The collision sent a shockwave through the plaza. On the other side, several Marine officers who had been crushed beneath the twin onslaught of haki finally began to pull themselves together. They were battle-hardened veterans, the backbone of the Marines. Now their eyes were red, their sets heaving, gasping as if they had just been hauled up from the ocean's depths. "We can't let him cause any more trouble." "You won't succeed. Surround him. Kill him." 7 or 8 figures, faces set and fearless, flashed out at once with Soru, leaving a scatter of afterimages as they converged on the man standing in the center of the plaza with a naginata. Kyle didn't even move the hand that held his polearm. He just stepped forward, calm as if on a stroll. A vice admiral, known for his deadly shigan, led the charge. He pressed 2 fingers together, coating them in armament hockey until they were as hard as steel. The air screamed as he thrust, aiming straight for Kyle's throat. Kyle didn't bother to look. He casually lifted his left hand and with his index and middle fingers, pinched. Clink. It was a soft, almost dainty sound, like someone pinching an embroidery needle. The fierce expression on the Vice Admiral's face froze and then collapsed into a look of pure horror. His shigan, powerful enough to pierce steel plates, had been caught without effort, and the force humming through his fingertips made it feel as though his finger bones would shatter the next second. Before he could react, Kyle flicked his wrist, and a concentrated force burst out. The Vice Admiral felt an irresistible impact seize him. He was ripped into the air, spun like a top, and slammed into the Marine beside him, who was just about to fire a rankyaku. They hit with a thunderous crash and rolled into a twisted heap. The sickening crunch of breaking bones made it clear neither would be getting up. Kyle was impossibly fast. In the rain, his silhouette smeared into afterimages, and with each flicker, another Marine elite fell. There were no flashy flourishes, no devil fruit tricks, only raw, frightening speed, strength, and combat skill. A rear admiral watched his men collapse and flared with fury. He braced himself instantly, every muscle hardening. "Tekai, go," he barked. His iron defense said to shrug off cannon fire. But Kyle was simply quicker. A seemingly casual elbow struck the admiral squarely in the chest. The iron-hard Tekai shattered with a sickening crack. The admiral's ribs gave way, his chest caved in, and he was sent flying like a broken kite, plowing through 7 or 8 Marines in his path. A single whip-like kick sent water and air slicing through the air like razor blades, cutting down 3 officers at once. Blood spurted from them mid-flight. They went limp and fell unconscious. In an instant, the ring of attackers collapsed. Kyle appeared like a ghost behind the last resisting Vice Admiral, seized him by the throat with one hand, and lifted him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. The man thrashed and kicked, his face turning a violent purple. "Too noisy," Kyle said calmly. With a casual toss, the Vice Admiral became a dark blur, slamming into a ruined building at the edge of the plaza with a thunderous crash. A human-shaped hole was blown through the wall. Smoke and dust billowed as rubble rained down. Apart from the distant world-shaking roar of the 3 legends battling far off, the plaza fell so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Kyle stood amid the unconscious Marines and slowly turned. In that oppressive silence, a sudden, lethal killing intent coalesced from nowhere. Kyle's head tilted a fraction to the right. Whoosh! A razor-thin beam of concentrated golden light, searing hot and fast enough to cut through anything, whistled past his ear. It tore a clean tunnel through the downpour, and every raindrop that touched it vaporized on the spot. The beam punched a smoking, mirror-smooth hole in the distant fortress wall. Rain hitting the molten edge hissed into steam. Kyle stopped for a heartbeat, his movement arrested. His golden pupils sliced through the sheets of rain and locked onto the silhouette of a far-off clock tower. A grin spread across his face, amused and alert. Sneak attacks aren't a good habit, Borsellino. Chapter 105, The 3 Future Admirals of the Navy. Here we go. From the shadow of the clock tower, a figure stepped forward. The lazy smile on his face belonged to the man who would later send supernovas flying one by one. Unfazed by Kyle's direct challenge, he gave no sign of surprise. Instead, he casually raised both hands in a mock surrender. It was Marine Vice Admiral Borsellino, the Glint man, eater of the notorious light devil fruit. Kyle's reply, however, was faster than his words. He lifted his right hand and pointed his index finger. A tiny, blinding mote of light, brighter than the sun, condensed at his fingertip in an instant. Then it vanished, and an equally compact, impossibly swift beam of light, even hotter, shot out in immediate retaliation. "Oh?" Borsellino's voice rose a fraction, and for the first time a trace of surprise flickered across his face. Boom! The explosion roared so loudly it even drowned out the sounds of Garp's fight with the golden lion in the distance. The instant the golden beam struck the top of the towering clock tower, it was as if an invisible, god-sized hand had wiped it away. There was no explosion, no raining debris, just the summit instantly vaporized by overwhelming energy, leaving a massive, smooth, glassy indentation with tendrils of smoke and steam curling up from it. The power of that strike was several times more terrifying than Borsellino's earlier sneak attack. Every conscious Marine in the plaza went pale, frozen as they stared at the suddenly empty space, unable to form a sound. Then, with a flash of light, Borsellino reappeared dozens of meters in front of where the tower's peak had been. He looked down at his unharmed body, then up at the man who had stood impervious to the storm. His usual lazy, amused expression finally shifted into something more serious. "Kowai ne," he drawled, the lecherous cadence he always used threaded now with a real note of apprehension. "As expected of a monster that can give the Gorosei headaches, this is really frightening." "Wave motion, King Kyle. A bit too ridiculously strong, aren't you?" the voice drawled, thick with sarcasm. The taunt grated through the crowd like a knife. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a bone-deep cold spread outward, unannounced. Ice crackled and snapped. Before the rain could even hit the ground, it froze into glittering crystals in midair. The puddles at Kyle's feet crystallized visibly, the frost racing outward until the earth was buried under a sheet of stark white. A tall, slim figure stepped forward from the ranks of Marine officers and pushed through the crowd. He looked young, his features set with stubborn resolve. His eyes burned with an inner fire that contradicted the icy aura radiating from him. "I haven't forgotten the last time you made a fool of me," he said. Kuzan stared at Kyle with an intensity that made the air hum. He kept his hands in his pockets and adopted a casual stance, but the cold that continually bled off him betrayed how unsettled he really was. "I can't believe you actually had the guts to come to Marineford," he added. The memory of their confrontation years ago and humiliation that had never left him hung between them like a fresh wound. Confronted with his enemy, Kuzan's joints cracked as he balled his hands into fists, clearly itching for a fight. His fighting spirit flared up like a held breath released. Kyle's eyes slid from Borsellino to Kuzan, a playful smirk tugging at his mouth. "How long ago was that? Still holding a grudge?" "You bastard!" Kuzan's face flushed instantly, veins standing out at his temples. He was on the verge of exploding when a new, terrifying heat rolled in from another direction, so intense it seemed to set the air itself alight. A stern-faced man with a cigar in his mouth stepped silently between Kuzan and Borsellino, positioning himself so the three of them formed a triangle around Kyle. He wasted no words. He simply fixed Kyle with a cold stare, eyes that looked like liquid volcanic rock. "Dangerous criminals, Lee, Kiyu, utterly evil, must be purged," Sakashiji said in a deep, hoarse voice laced with unmistakable killing intent. "Justice tolerates no compromise. Threats must be snuffed out in the bud." He added, declaring with grim certainty that the three who would become admirals of the Marines stood there together. Before he finished speaking, Sakashiji's right arm had already transformed into a seething, viscous stream of dark red magma. Great eruption! There was no probing, no hesitation. His opening strike was his deadliest. The enormous magma fist surged forward like a living volcano, trailing black smoke and shimmering heat as it smashed toward Kyle's position. The ground along its path liquefied, the air warped and scorched, and the rain that fell into its wake flashed into white steam with a sharp hissing crackle. Anything in its path would be erased. The plaza, the people, Kyle himself. Kyle did not flinch immediately. Even three admirals at the height of their power, working together, would have made escape nearly impossible. These three had only just graduated. They were nowhere near their peak, but that made little difference now. The moving volcano before him was more than enough to melt cities and burn towns. Dodging it might be pointless. At last, Kyle moved. He brought the black and gold naginata he had been casually resting on his shoulder up in front of him, planting its shaft against the ground and setting its blade before his chest. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Sizzle! Black and gold haki erupted from Kyle like writhing dragon serpents, coiling frantically around his ancient naginata. No fanfare, no named technique, just a single, unadorned slash. His arm guided the blade in a straight, uncompromising arc. Sakasiji's enormous magma fist, the kind of blow that could boil steel to steam, should have caused an earth-shattering collision. Instead, where it met Kyle's blade, it popped like a soap bubble. The magma collapsed, disintegrated, and vanished into nothingness from the point of contact. The searing heat, the roaring inferno, even the intent to incinerate everything were swallowed whole by that apparently ordinary cut. And the slash didn't lose an ounce of its force. The haki condensed into a pitch-black, gold-edged arc that peeled away from the blade, tore through the curtain of rain, and shot straight for Sakasiji. "Nani?" For the first time, something like shock flashed across Sakasiji's otherwise stern, unflinching face. He didn't even have time to react before the fatal slash scored his chest. Boom! Sakasiji was struck as if hit by a meteor, his body folding backward in a grotesque shrimp-like arc. His cigar and blood flew out of his mouth. He became a black blur, hurled backward far faster than he'd come, gouging a deep trench through the earth in his wake before smashing into a distant, already ruined marine office building. The whole structure trembled and then collapsed with a thunderous crash, burying him beneath the rubble. One strike. Just one strike. The man who would one day be known as Admiral Akainu, feared by countless pirates, had been felled outright. His fate hung unknown beneath the wreckage. The Marines watching from a distance fell completely silent, mouths agape, eyes nearly bulging out of their sockets. They stared at the smoke-choked ruins, then at the man standing there with his naginata sheathed, as if he'd merely flicked away a fly, their minds blank. What had they just witnessed? That was Sakasiji, an elite of the Marine training camp, a literal monster among soldiers. And yet, Haoshoku. The word trembled through them. Haoshoku haki, conqueror's haki. They realized, too late to fully understand, that something far beyond ordinary skill had just been unleashed. Haki. Vice Admiral Tsuru's voice held a faint tremor. She stared, unblinking, at the naginata in Kyle's grip. The black and gold lightning crawling along its blade was slowly dying away, and even that sight sent a chill straight through her. This was no longer just a devil fruit effect, nor merely an advanced fighting style. It was a power only a handful of the world's strongest could command, the kind reserved for those who stand at the very summit and possess the bearing of a king. On the far side of the battlefield, the thunder of their clash suddenly fell silent. Garp's iron fist, the kind of blow that could level mountains, froze in mid-swing. He turned his head abruptly, his gaze slid past Golden Lion Shiki and fixed on Kyle, his expression grave. Sengoku, massive in his golden Buddha form, also ceased sending out shockwaves. The Buddha's head pivoted the same way, its solemn face unusually alert. They all recognized that power. It was a king's proof on the same level as Roger's, perhaps even more domineering. "You bastard!" Golden Lion Shiki's roar cracked like thunder and shattered the momentary stillness. Seizing the split-second distraction of Garp and Sengoku, he intensified his assault, his fury becoming even more ferocious. "How dare you get distracted in the middle of a fight? Don't underestimate me, Garp. Sengoku, I am Golden Lion Shiki." "Wave slash," he bellowed. Two massive, flying slashes ripped through the air, crossing one another with unstoppable force and bearing down on the two giants. Garp and Sengoku snapped back to their senses at once, recognizing the danger, and turned to meet the incoming attack. The battlefield of the three legends erupted again in thunderous roars. Sakasiji's great eruption was only beginning to take effect. Rain hammered down onto the seared molten ground and hissed away the moment it touched, rising in thick, choking vapor that blotted out the sky. White mist mingled with black smoke and quickly swallowed the entire square. Visibility collapsed to less than 3 meters. The once open field became a mist-filled hell where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Then, without warning, several golden shafts of light stabbed out from deep inside the fog. They crisscrossed at cruelly precise angles, sealing off every route Kyle might take. "This is A terrifying power, isn't it? Borsellino's lazy voice drifted through the mist, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But in an environment like this, can you still keep up with my speed? More beams answered him. Dozens of golden lasers tore through the steam and darkness, raining down with the density and relentlessness of a storm. A bone-deep cold spread through the thick mist, faster and more merciless than before. Ice Age! Kuzan's voice was low and unyielding. Abandoning pinpoint strikes, he unleashed a wide-area assault that engulfed the whole battlefield. Crackling sounds filled the air as ice raced outward with Kyle at its center. The ground, the rain, even the water vapor froze in an instant. Pale sheets of frost converged from every direction, snapping and splitting as if trying to seal the chaotic field into a permanent ice coffin. Then a strange sight took shape. The lasers, beams that could normally cut through anything, began to refract as soon as they came within a meter of Kyle, as if striking an unseen lens. Some arcs bent upward and vanished into the stormy sky. Others zipped down and left useless scorch marks on the frozen earth. Many crossed one another, whistling past the folds of his clothing before dissipating into empty air. He stood inside an apparently invulnerable sphere. By subtly warping the light waves around him, Kyle had transformed Kuzan's potentially lethal assault into a dazzling but harmless fireworks display. What should have finished him off was reduced to nothing more than a theatrical show. Deep in the mist, Borsellino's trademark "Oh my" came out half a beat late. Kyle merely tapped the butt of his naginata against the ground. A low, resonant hum rolled outward from him. The surging sheets of ice struck that invisible wave as if against a wall. The front edge of the ice began to shudder violently, like a sieve. Bang! Bang, bang, bang! The steel-hard ice started to crumble and fracture from within. In an instant, it broke apart into billions of glittering crystals, finer than dust, raining down with a soft rustle. With only two simple motions, the combined assault, what should have been the Marine's greatest power, was neutralized, effortlessly. As the mist thinned, Kuzan and Borsellino came into view, standing opposite Kyle, one to his left and one to his right. For the first time, both men's usual expressions slipped. Kuzan's stern resolve gave way to astonishment, and Borsellino's habitual nonchalance turned to an uncharacteristic gravity. A sudden violent commotion rose from the ruins at the far end of the square. Cough! Cough! Crash! A collapsed wall burst inward, and a blood-soaked figure hauled himself out of the rubble. It was Sakasiji. A jagged wound split his chest so deep that bone showed, charred flesh peeled back, and a steady mixture of blood and molten rock oozed from the gash. Every movement twisted his face with pain, but his eyes burned with an intensity hotter than the lava that leaked from him. Around him, men stood pale and frozen, grips on swords and guns trembling. Faces that had always looked sharp now registered only confusion and retreat. Rage, raw and more painful than any wound, exploded in Sakasiji's chest. "You." His voice was hoarse, but it carried like thunder. "What are you hesitating for?" He bellowed until the very air vibrated. "Look behind you. That is Marineford. That is the face of justice. Look at your comrades, lying at your feet. That man is a sin that threatens the peace of the sea. When faced with sin, there is only one thing the Marines must do: crush it completely. We are the Marines of Justice." His right arm flared, molten and searing, reshaping itself into living magma once more. He braced his tottering body with that arm of molten rock, pointed at Kyle, and roared, each word a deliberate strike. "To protect this sea, even if I die, I will not regret it." The line hit like thunder in the chests of every Marine. What were they supposed to be afraid of? They were Marines, the last line of defense for the civilians. From the moment they donned that uniform and wore justice on their backs, they had already set aside the choice between life and death. Wavering eyes steadied. Trembling hands closed around swords and rifles once more. Confused, faltering wills were rekindled into fierce resolve. A rising, ragged cry swept through them. "Vice Admiral Sakasiji is right. We are the Marines." Under Sakasiji's blood-soaked roar, the morale that had seemed shattered miraculously reformed. Dozens of officers snapped back into formation, eyes alight with desperate fire, and moved to surround Kyle. Kyle watched in silence. He took in the sight of the heavily wounded Sakasiji, still unbowed, and the Marines who, despite their fear, had chosen to stand and fight. The faint, playful smile on his face finally faded. Heh! Kyle let out a short, amused sound as he slowly lowered the black and gold naginata from his shoulder and settled both hands on the hilt. The relaxed, unhurried pose he had worn a moment before vanished, replaced by a cold, immovable calm. "Heroes of the world are as numerous as carp leaping a river," he murmured, words meant for his enemies and for himself. Then, as a retort, he raised his head, and a blinding light flared from his golden eyes. A far more terrifying aura than before poured off him, filling the air. To him, the highest form of respect for a worthy opponent was simple. Meet them with your fullest, most crushing strength. I, Kyle, hereby bestow upon you the title of 3 Admirals of the Navy. The proclamation ignited something in them. Their newly lit resolve overcame any lingering fear, and the eyes of dozens of Marine officers flamed with desperate determination. Moonwalk, finger pistol, barrage, tempest kick, chaos. In an instant, the square filled with the tier of slicing air, sharp whooshes, and defiant battle cries. Confronted by that torrent of conviction, Kyle's response was blunt and immediate. He moved. A Marine colonel, trained in the 6 Powers Soru, bent space into an afterimage and appeared in Kyle's blind spot, a long blade sheathed in armament hockey aimed straight for his back. Before the tip could even graze Kyle's coat, an invisible shockwave detonated against the colonel's chest. Kyle vanished from his original position and reappeared behind the colonel, as if the two had traded places. Pfft! The colonel's uniform split open at the chest. He was slammed as if by a sledgehammer. Blood spurted from his mouth, and he crumpled forward, collapsing weakly to the ground. Kyle wove through the crowd with an effortless grace, moving so quickly that he was impossible to catch. In seconds, the stalemate collapsed. The square rang with cries of agony. Marine officers lay scattered, unconscious or grievously wounded, none of them able to rise. The heavy rain continued, washing over the battered scene. Only 4 figures remained standing on the wide plaza. Kyle in the center, surrounded by Sakasiji, Kuzan, and Borsellino, who formed a triangle around him. Sakasiji spat a mouthful of blood mixed with molten matter. A jagged slash across his chest stabbed like a knife every time he drew breath, yet he stood ramrod straight, the killing intent in his eyes clearer and fiercer than before. Kuzan's habitual hands-in-pockets pose had disappeared. He hunched forward slightly, cold radiating from him, and the falling raindrops froze into glittering ice crystals as they passed his aura. Borsellino's usual laziness was gone as well. He raised both hands a fraction, golden light shimmering at his fingertips, his face sharpened into an expression of unprecedented vigilance. "This is," Borsellino drawled, stretching the words out as if to lighten the charged air, "an incredible monster, truly difficult to deal with." Before his voice faded, Sakasiji moved. "Meteor volcano." His roar split the rain. His arms convulsed and reshaped into massive volcanic vents. From them erupted countless colossal lava fists that blasted upward, shredding the curtain of rain and then crashing down on Kyle like the sky itself had torn open. At nearly the same instant, Kuzan slammed his hands into the ground. Ice block, pheasant beak. A gigantic icebird burst free, beating vast wings of frost as it shot straight for Kyle's chest, its bone-chilling cold freezing the rain in its wake. Meanwhile, Borsellino dissolved into a streak of golden light and materialized behind Kyle. Points of radiance gathered at his fingertips. "Yasakani, sacred jewel," he intoned, and a torrent of golden light bullets poured out, drenching every possible retreat behind Kyle. From above and below, front and back, Kyle was suddenly trapped. Lava, ice, and light converging in an instantaneous, seamless strike. The 3 of them had woven a net of certain death. A faint smile of satisfaction finally crossed Kyle's face. He raised his left hand, spread his fingers, and curled them toward the rain of lava and fire roaring down from the sky. This was the fruit of decades spent refining his devil fruit power. Pushing into the edges of space-time, he summoned a ripple of gravity. "All things in heaven and earth, attract!" he commanded. The barrage of meteoric volcanoes hanging in the air seemed to freeze, every fiery projectile suspended at once. Then, as if seized by an invisible force, they arced in strange trajectories and hurtled straight into the massive icebird that had been attacking from the front. Fire met frost with thunderous detonations. Lava and absolute cold collided, mid-air, in a series of explosive impacts. The energy discharged outward in a circular shockwave, vaporizing everything it touched into a thick, sky-darkening steam that engulfed the battlefield. "What?" Kuzan and Sakashiji shouted together. Kyle's right hand rested on the black and gold naginata. Without turning his head, he swung it casually backward. A prismatic flash skittered along the blade and vanished. A dazzling arc of rainbow sword energy met the dense downpour of golden light bullets from behind with perfect surgical precision. Wherever the rainbow blade passed, it seemed to draw an invisible prism in the air. As the lethal beams crossed that prism, they were refracted and split apart, turning into a sky full of brilliant, scattering points of light that painted the steaming mist in a riot of colors, like something out of a dream. "Oh my!" Borsellino's voice echoed through the fog, stunned. He watched, wide-eyed, as several of his own lasers were bent 90 degrees and sailed off toward Garp and the Golden Lion in the distance. "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Mr. Garp, look out!" he called. Garp deflected the Golden Lion's slash with a solid punch, then spun and backhanded to shatter the misdirected beams. He roared, "Borsellino, what the hell are you doing?" Inside the thick vapor, 3 figures closed in again from different directions, converging rapidly on Kyle at the center. Buzz. The ground beneath their feet shuddered violently without warning. It wasn't an earthquake, so much as if the floor had become a giant drumhead. A sudden pounding vibration slammed up through their souls, a furious frequency that raced into their bodies. "Uff!" All 3 groaned at once, their high-speed charges coming to an abrupt stop. Sakashiji felt his bones screaming under the high-frequency vibration. The water inside Kuzan's body seemed to boil, and Borsellino's elemental form buckled as particles dispersed, his shape barely holding together. In that split second of weakness, Kyle slipped between them. He drove a plain, brutal elbow into Sakashiji's old, bone-deep wound. Pain twisted Sakashiji's stern face, and he was sent flying backward, curling like a boiled shrimp. Kyle's next move was a precise whip kick across Kuzan's waist. The force flung Kuzan sideways. He smashed into a broken statue and toppled to the ground. Then Kyle's palm struck, simple, deceptively slow, and hit Borsellino across the neck just as the latter was reforming his body. Borsellino's eyes rolled back. He collapsed as if a machine had lost power. The fierce exchange stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Steam thinned and drifted away, and the rain returned, washing over the ruined battlefield. Sakashiji fought to push himself up, bracing on his magma-formed arm, but a tremor that had run through his body forced a stifled groan from his throat. Kuzan lay amid the rubble, cold air still radiating off him, but he couldn't get to his feet for a long time. The sharp pain in his waist made his mouth twitch with each attempt. Borsellino was the worst off. Sprawled on his back in a puddle, frozen in the exact posture he'd been in when struck by the palm blade, muttering over and over, "Scary, so scary." After that brutal clash, all 3 were broken and bleeding, wounded in every direction. In the center of the field, Kyle slowly righted himself and resumed a normal stance. The wind and rain still whipped around him, yet not a single drop seemed to touch him. Only a smear of mud clung to the hem of his clothes. His breathing was a little heavier for a moment, then steadied within 2 breaths. He shifted his gaze to another fight farther off. True to form, Old Man Garp was still fighting with terrifying ferocity. Golden Lion Shiki's slashes had long since lost their rhythm. Garp's iron fists hammered him back step by step, and Sengoku, just as formidable, stood ready at his side. Shiki's defeat was no longer a question of if, only of when. Kyle watched, and the decision he'd been holding in reserve fell into place. The timing for what some might call selling out his tea, memmates, he preferred the term strategic withdrawal, was ripe. He turned toward the 3 young admirals, who stood ragged and bloodied, their uniforms torn, faces streaked with sweat and salt. For the first time, Kyle's expression went utterly serious. "This battle will likely end in a Marine victory," he said, voice low but carrying. "All 3 of you are very powerful. I, Kyle, hereby bestow upon you the title of the Marine 3 Admirals." He paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "But understand this, the price of surviving is not free. Each of you will have to carry your own honor." 108. Dragon and Lion Rebellion. Time seemed to stutter for a heartbeat. Sakazuki's roar rolled across the plaza, and on another patch of battlefield, it cut Golden Lion Shiki's wild laughter short. Thief, ha! A bunch of ants who don't know their place, still yapping at a time like this, Shiki sneered, but his contempt couldn't hide the fact that Garp and Sengoku's combined pressure had already taken his breath away. The Marine's morale, fired up by Sakazuki's shout, only made him more irritable. "Don't talk nonsense, Shiki," Garp barked. Garp's fist, sheathed in pitch-black armament haki, sliced through the air with oppressive force. The very atmosphere groaned under each swing. "Do you not understand your situation?" Sengoku agreed, his golden Buddha form looming solemnly. Each shockwave he unleashed crashed like an avalanche and a tidal wave, one more devastating than the last. "Garp's right. Your era ended the moment we stood together." "Ended?" Shiki's eyes went bloodshot, a mad grin twisting his face. "Don't get cocky." "My great ambition has only just begun," Shiki roared. He dropped his guard entirely. His Sakura Ten and Naginata split into two colossal slashes that cleaved through sky and stone, hungrily sweeping toward the two targets before him, Garp and Golden Lion, without a hint of restraint. Garp watched, unperturbed. To him, this reckless, all-or-nothing tactic was the greatest flaw of all. "Too naive, Shiki," he muttered. The Admiral vanished from his original position and reappeared over Golden Lion in an instant. He lifted his right fist, channeling terrifying reserves of haki and brute force into a single point. At the edge of that fist, it looked as if a galaxy were folding in on itself. Fistbone meteor. Golden Lion's pupils snapped tight. There was no time to raise a defense. The fist, as if bearing the weight of a world, slammed into his chest and left a smoking imprint. For a heartbeat, everything seemed frozen. Then the built-up destructive force detonated. Golden Lion's body fell like a true meteor. He crashed onto Marineford's plaza with unstoppable force, gouging out an enormous, seemingly bottomless crater. Spiderweb cracks radiated across half the square as debris rained down. Pwah! At the bottom of the pit, Golden Lion spat a mouthful of blood. His body was a broken wreck. Countless bones shattered, and he no longer had the strength to rise. But Sengoku knew better than to leave a foe unfinished. Buddha's shockwave. A colossal golden palm descended from the sky, striking the center of the pit. The shockwave congealed like an iron seal, the oppressive weight of a Buddha pressing Golden Lion flat, snuffing out any last spark of resistance. Oh! Golden Lion is defeated. The remaining Marine officers exploded into relieved cheers. They surged forward with the sea stone chains they'd been readying and, working together, bound the immobilized Golden Lion until he could no longer move. Bastard! Garp! Sengoku! He cursed weakly. Then his head lolled and he slipped into unconsciousness. With the greatest threat dealt with, Garp and Sengoku finally turned their attention to the other battlefield. The brief look they exchanged wiped the relief from their faces. They came upon nothing but ruin. Kuzan, Borsellino, and Sakashiji lay scattered among the smashed stone and splintered beams, bloodied, battered, struggling to rise and collapsing back down again. At the very center of the devastation stood Aaron Keel, motionless. Garp and Sengoku exchanged a single wordless look and then surged forward. Aaron's eyes passed over the two legends closing on him and rested on the Golden Lion, Shiki, who a little way off had been bundled up like a dumpling by the Marines. Truly, unsightly Shiki, Aaron murmured, so quietly that only he could hear it. The wind shrieked. Garp and Sengoku landed to either side of Aaron Kale, taking up positions that formed a new standoff. No cries, no questions, just three great men facing one another, and the clash of their unseen wills made the air thick and oppressive. After a long, tense beat, Aaron broke the silence. He slowly lowered his black and gold naginata, both hands closing on the hilt, as he settled into a steady, deliberate fighting stance. "It's a shame to say," Aaron Kale said calmly, his voice carrying easily to Garp and Sengoku. "This sword has been at my side for decades, and yet the world still doesn't even know its name." His body dipped a fraction, and the brilliant golden light that had filled his eyes extinguished, collapsing into a boundless, bottomless darkness. "Today," he added, "I will use it to end this farce." The words had barely left his lips when a black and gold surge of Hao Shoku burst from him like a volcanic eruption. The dark clouds above spun into a furious vortex, lightning stitched the sky together, and thunder rolled in answer. "This sword is called Nidhogg," he declared, "and this technique is called," he intoned, gripping the hilt with both hands and snapping the blade upward in a single violent motion. Dragon Slayer. A roar, ancient and terrible, ripped through Marineford. A pitch-black slash tore free from the sword and took shape. Not merely sword energy, but a colossal dragon born of pure will and Haoshoku. Black and gold lightning coiled down its length, scales gleaming like night-forged armor, eyes set with feral intent. It bore the force to rend heaven and earth and topple kings, and it came roaring straight for Garp and Sengoku. Wherever the blow passed, earth was ripped open, the sky itself seemed to tear, and everything in its path was crushed and atomized by that overwhelming force. It was a slash that could have split all of Marineford in two. Garp and Sengoku's faces changed at the same instant. "Bastard!" Garp roared, not retreating but charging forward. His right fist, sheathed in armament haki, pushed to its limit and shining like a black sun, slammed straight into the dragon's ferocious head. "Ha!" Sengoku struck at the same moment. The golden Buddha palm reappeared, its spherical shockwaves converging with unprecedented focus, and it came down hard on the dragon's body. The Navy's two strongest fighters pooled their power and stood together against the onslaught. Boom! A sound beyond description tore through the air. The world seemed to lose both sound and color. Blinding light swallowed everything, and from the point of impact, a terrifying storm of energy radiated outward in a circular shockwave. The outer walls of Marineford, rocked by the aftershocks, crumbled layer by layer like a stack of brittle biscuits. Countless buildings were ripped from their foundations and hurled into the air, only to be torn to dust by the furious energy before they could fall. Smoke and steam blurred the sky and hung there for a long time. When, after an unknowable stretch of time, the storm of destruction finally quieted, a few small, telling details remained. Blood seeped from the knuckles of Garp's fist. A streak of red clung to the corner of Sengoku's mouth. They had taken the blow. But on the other side, nothing. Aaron Kale, the Wave Motion King, had vanished without a trace, as if he had never stood there at all. Only a massive scar cutting across Marineford and the cold drizzle still falling from the sky attested to what had just occurred. Pirate King narrator's voice. From that day on, the Dragon Lion Rebellion, the assault that had destroyed most of Marineford, was over. The Flying Admiral, Golden Lion Shiki, had been defeated and imprisoned. Aaron Kale, the Wave Motion King, remained at large. The Marines had paid a heavy price. To be continued. 109. What bad intentions could the little pirate have? The first thin ray of dawn stabbed through the lingering storm clouds and fell across a ruined Marineford. Once the very emblem of absolute justice and order, the island was now little more than rubble. A massive scar, torn by the attack called the Dragon Slayer, gaped like a black chasm through the plaza, cleaving the fortress and the town behind it in two. Marines moved silently through the wreckage, hauling debris away and carrying the wounded. The air was heavy with the damp, earthy smell of rain, the metallic tang of blood, and an unshakable sour weight best described as humiliation. Inside a makeshift medical tent, Kuzan sat with his torso tightly bandaged, weakly shoving ice cubes into his mouth to dull the burning pain. He muttered under his breath, "Damn it," between each clumsy gulp of cold. On the next cot, Borsellino lay with a large ice pack pressed to his head, either asleep or unconscious. Only Sakasiji refused to lie down. Shirtless, he stood with a gruesome wound across his chest that had been hastily treated and wrapped in many layers of bandage. He refused any anesthetic or painkillers. Standing ramrod straight at the tent's entrance, he stared at the huge gouge that scarred Marineford, his eyes so dark they seemed to leak sorrow. A short distance away, Chief of Staff Tsuru held a freshly compiled battle damage report and handed it to Sengoku, who sat on a pile of rubble with his brow tightly furrowed. Over a third of Marineford's buildings were completely destroyed, she said, her voice as calm as ever, but edged with fatigue. 137 officers at colonel rank and above were seriously wounded. That figure doesn't even include the 3 warships the Golden Lion's fleet sank. Sengoku took the paper, scanned it once, then crumpled it in his hand with a sharp crackle. His golden Buddha form had long since faded. His gray hair was tousled by the morning breeze. He looked up. "Where's Garp?" "Over there." Tsuru tilted her chin. Sengoku followed her gesture and saw Garp sitting cross-legged on a large slab of shattered wall, loudly munching from a bag of rice crackers as if nothing else existed around him. Crunch, crunch. Garp! Sengoku's vein throbbed at his temple. Now, of all times, you have the nerve to be eating. Garp crunched on a rice cracker and spoke around it, calm as ever. How am I supposed to have the strength to rebuild if I don't eat, Sengoku? Want one? They're good. And I brought tea too. I'll bite your head off, Sengoku snapped, so furious he could barely breathe. At that moment, a news coup fluttered down from the sky and dropped a newspaper, still smelling faintly of ink, at Sengoku's feet. The headline screamed across the front page in huge type, "The Tragedy of Marineford. Sky Admiral and Wave Motion King join forces. Marineford lay in ruins." The photos beneath were horrifying, a single scar-like slash running the length of the island, an image of Shiki the Golden Lion shackled in sea stone manacles, and a blurred side profile of Kale delivering a final shadowy dragon-shaped slash. Morgans, Sengoku said, trembling with rage as he picked up the paper. That man. This was only the beginning. Meanwhile, somewhere on the Grand Line, inside a tavern, the boisterous music and the patrons' raucous laughter cut off in an instant when the owner slammed a newspaper down on the bar. Hey, look at this! Every head turned. When the headline and photograph caught their eye, the whole bar dropped into a deathly silence. The paper trembled in a drunken bounty hunter's hand as he blinked at the image. Are you kidding me? Marineford looks like it got smashed to pieces, he stammered, the alcohol draining from his voice in an instant. Golden Lion Shiki, that legendary pirate, he actually teamed up with the Wave Motion King Kale? Good God, this world's gone mad, another cried. First the public execution of Pirate King Roger, and now Marineford is leveled. A beat of stunned quiet. The room erupted. Panic, exhilaration, disbelief. Every emotion ricocheted through the crowd. People shouted, cursed, laughed, and trembled all at once. The old order felt like it was crumbling. A new era seemed to be roaring in with a force no one had expected. Mary Giois. The room of authority felt as oppressive as the deepest ocean trench. The 5 Gorosei, the unquestioned summit of the world's power, sat around a long table. Spread out before them were the battle damage report from Marineford and the morning's world economic news, the shocking photos visible for anyone to see. What an utter disgrace! The bald Gorosei, sword in hand, spoke with a voice as chilling as a blade. Marineford itself had been thrown into chaos by 2 pirates. The room was grim as the 5 elders gathered around the conference table. The world government's prestige has taken a hit, one elder said. The Golden Lion is no longer a problem. He's been captured. But Aaron Kale. The long-bearded Gorosei tapped his knuckles on the table as he looked up. His boba fruit power has evolved to an extremely dangerous level. Worse still, he was a member of Gol D Rogers' crew. This threat has to be extinguished at once, another elder snapped. And Gol D Rogers' execution is already sensitive enough, a third added. Cancel the post-execution tour. It can't happen now. Kong has already submitted his resignation, someone reported. He's taking responsibility and stepping down as Fleet Admiral. Humph, the eldest elder made a satisfied sound. He's decisive. But now is not the time for assigning blame. Issue the orders immediately. The bounty on Wave Motion King Aaron Kale is to be reinstated. No, rewritten. And the amount, a voice asked. There was a short pause. Then the Gorosei spoke, voice cold and final. Set it at 3,160,000,000 berries. Make it public. It is decided. Let every jackal in the world hunt him. Let there be no sea where he can hide. Across the oceans, the word spread like wildfire. Bounty hunters, pirates, and opportunists, the jackals of the seas, stared at the decree and one another, hesitation and greed warring on their faces. Me? One muttered. You want me to take down the Wave Motion King? Wave Motion King, Aaron Kale, one of the core members of the original Roger Pirates, proficient in all 3 forms of hockey, suspected user of the boba fruit, Logia type, one of the masterminds behind the Dragon Lion Rebellion. Bounty, 3,160,000 berries, wanted, dead or alive, extremely heinous. Marineford, temporary command center. Sengoku slammed his fist down on the table. The teacups jumped and clattered. 3,160,000,000? Have the Gorosei gone mad? Do they want every pirate in the world to see Marineford as a stepping stone to glory? The new bounty poster had been issued faster and with far more exaggeration than Sengoku had expected. "Calm down, Sengoku," Garp said, unruffled. "A bigger number just makes the enemies we beat look more impressive." "Impressive?" Sengoku snapped, shoving a freshly printed interview article across the table. He jabbed a finger at the headline and, red-faced, shouted, "And you, Garp, what did you tell those reporters?" The headline in the paper screamed back at them, "Marine Hero Garp, exclusive interview. Wave Motion King hasn't reached his peak. He's younger than we thought." Beneath it, the article printed Garp's words verbatim. "Huh? Kale? Oh, he's incredibly strong, like a monster. I even thought about taking him on as a disciple back then." "Wait, this is going to be printed? Okay, that bit just now, forget it, cut it out. But honestly, I don't think he's used his full strength yet. His power probably hasn't peaked. And that kid, he actually has a way to slow aging, unlike old geezers like me and Sengoku, whose strength is about used up." "Ha ha ha!" Sengoku clutched his chest as his blood pressure spiked. "Do you realize what that implies?" he roared. "Now the whole world will believe a monster has appeared, one younger and with more terrifying potential than Roger or Whitebeard. At the exact moment the old era is collapsing, you personally handed them a new fuse." Garp just picked at his nose with an innocent look. "I was only telling the truth," he said. "You want me to lie?" Sengoku had no retort. He was left speechless. Sengoku knew Garp was telling the truth. In that last exchange, the two of them, working together, had come away with only minor injuries, while their opponent had calmly broken off and walked away. He had retreated with an ease that made it obvious he hadn't been using his full strength. Even worse, from Kale's aura it was clear he was entering the peak of his power, and Haki, reaching the very height of his potential. That was the most frightening thing. A monster in his prime, strong enough to take the combined force of two legends, and with limitless, unfathomable growth ahead of him. "Damn you, Garp." Sengoku sank back into his chair and rubbed his temples. "What are you trying to do? Praise him into his own doom? Or are you actually worried about the future of the Marines?" Garp said nothing. He picked up another rice cracker in silence, his gaze drifting, almost unconsciously, to the tier in the sky above. The storm had only just begun. That afternoon, Newscoos carried fresh bounty posters of Aaron, Wave Motion King, Kale to every corner of the world. The photo showed a man with black hair and golden eyes, an unreadable calm on his face, set against the burning ruins of Marineford. Countless would-be heroes, schemers, strongmen, and desperados lit up at the sight of the bounty poster, greed and fanaticism flaring in their eyes. Far from that clamor, out in a quiet stretch of the calm belt, a singular, oddly shaped sloop drifted alone on the water. Inside its cabin, Kale sat cross-legged. He stirred, then slowly opened his golden eyes. His finishing technique, the Dragon Slayer, had taken everything out of him. It had taken a whole night of meditation to fully recover. He rose, stepped out onto the deck, and stretched until his joints popped in a series of sharp, satisfying cracks. He skimmed the latest paper, and his expression hardened. That damned Morgans had done it again. For clicks, or rather sales, he would print anything. The headlines were lurid. Wave Motion King single-handedly covers the sky, deceives the Golden Lion, Marineford runs red, and remnant of the old era, source of disaster for the new, dominating two eras. Each dramatic photo, paired with outrageously inflammatory copy, cast him as an overreaching behind-the-scenes manipulator, pulling every string of the conspiracies. "I can do that, but I only see a single line right now. I've been wronged. I'm just a passing free-spirited little pirate. What bad intentions could I possibly have?" Please paste the full chapter you want rewritten. If it's long, you can paste it in multiple messages. Also tell me any preferences for tone or voice. For example, keep a playful, piratey voice, make it more serious, keep first-person narration, etc. Chapter 110, Offset Trajectory. In a sleepy little port town, a red-nosed teenager was in the middle of a loud argument with a burly black market dealer, spitting between his words. "Hey, we agreed on 3 million berries, not a penny less. Look at his bounty poster. It's written in black and white," he shouted, jabbing a finger at the pirate captain, who was tied up like a rolled bundle and bruised all over. The dealer picked idly at his teeth, and sneered. This one was knocked out by your trick. There isn't even a proper wound on him. 2.5 million. Take it or leave it. You scoundrel, do you not value my brilliant plan? The red-nosed youth stamped his foot, his nose flushing an even deeper crimson as he prepared another ornate speech to drive the price back up. Then a passing bystander's newspaper caught his eye. The front page was dominated by a photograph, that familiar profile, that unmistakable black and gold naginata. The boy's eyes went wide. He snatched the paper from the passerby's hand, ignoring the curses that followed, and pressed himself to the headline as if the picture might leap off the page. Marineford, reduced to ruins, wave motion king. Buggy's mouth hung open. When he reached the line of numbers that followed, his mind short-circuited entirely. He read them aloud like someone counting change. Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, and then froze. 3,160,000,000 berries? A hoarse scream tore from him and echoed through the docks. Everyone nearby stared as if he'd gone mad, but Buggy didn't care. He clutched the newspaper, hands trembling with excitement, eyes shining with stars and pure awe. Isn't this Kyle, bro? Amazing, came murmurs around him. Incredible. He single-handedly turned Marineford upside down. This is what a true pirate is. Buggy spun on the spot as if he himself had won the battle. The black market merchant beside him frowned at the commotion and tossed a heavy bag of berries onto the ground. All right. Keep it down, will you? Take the money and get out of here. Now! Buggy's rant died on the air the instant he caught the scent of coins. He dove for the bag and shoved every last bill inside with a speed no ordinary person could match, his face lighting up with the giddy grin of someone in love with money. Still, he clung to the newspaper as if it were a priceless relic. Just you wait, Kyle, bro. Captain Buggy will have his own crew soon enough, and my name will be feared across this sea. With his money sack slung over one shoulder and the paper clutched to his chest, he put his back to the setting sun, struck what he thought was an impossibly cool pose, and strode off. Grand Line, a breeze rippled through a field of flowers, carrying a clean, fresh scent. Beneath a broad tree, a red-haired teen idly prodded at an ant trail with a blade of grass. A Western-style sword hung at his hip. His eyes were clear and calm, his bearing betraying a carefree ease beyond his years. A newsbird cruised overhead and dropped a paper that fluttered down to land at his feet. He picked it up casually, and the lazy look on his face froze the moment he read the front-page headline. He read the whole report carefully, word by word, from the opening about the Dragon Lion Rebellion, through Garp's blunt, tell-it-like-it-is interview, and finally to that brand-new, astronomically high wanted poster. After a long moment, the shock on the teen's face slowly melted away and was replaced by a wide, brilliant grin. Ha! He couldn't help laughing aloud. Casually, he set his straw hat on his head and rolled back onto the grass, staring up at the sky. Honestly, Kyle Bro is the same as ever. Either he does nothing, or he does something huge. Shanks's eyes glittered with excitement and a touch of longing. Facing Garp and Sengoku by himself, just thinking about it makes my blood boil. He thought back to his days aboard Roger's ship, the man who was always gentle but more dependable than anyone once the fighting began. A strict teacher and a true friend, the man who taught him swordplay, drank with him, and joined in pranks that were strange and unforgettable. Amazing. A soft, sincere sigh of admiration escaped his lips. I can't just keep taking it easy, Shanks said. He sat up, brushed grass from his clothes, and his expression hardened. I need to find a dependable crew and get moving. He folded the newspaper carefully and tucked it to his chest. A new era was coming, and he couldn't afford to be left out. Sabaudi Archipelago, Area 13, Shacky's Ripoff Bar. Inside, mellow jazz wove through the low murmur of patrons. Rayleigh sat in a corner, idly swirling the whiskey in his glass, looking every bit the unobtrusive artisan among the bar's noise. Shacky, cigarette tucked to her lip, pushed the newspaper across the table toward him. Look at this, Rayleigh. Your brother's made headlines again. Rayleigh raised an eyebrow, adjusted his glasses, and skimmed the paper. His face gave nothing away as he scanned the sensational headlines and pictures. Only when he came to the account of Kyle's Dragon Slayer technique and the final bounty, 3,160,000, Did his hand falter for a moment? He lifted his glass and drained the amber liquid in one long swallow. Heh, that man. Rayleigh set the glass down and, eyes on Kyle's composed face in the newspaper, said softly, "He always takes the most direct way to cut through the rules he can't stand." Shaki let a smoke ring drift from her lips and, intrigued, asked, "So what is he trying to do? Warn the world government before Roger's execution?" "A warning? No, it's more than that." Rayleigh shook his head. His gaze lingered on the paper for a moment, then went past it, as if looking somewhere far beyond the room. At Marineford, the rebuilding was already in full swing. Broken steel beams were hauled away by the dozen, and new alloy materials were being rushed in from ports around the globe. The Marines no longer wore the hollow looks of those defeated in war. Humiliation had ignited a fierce, almost fanatical resolve. They intended to raise a fortress larger and stronger than ever, and to do it fast. They wanted the world to see that the bastion of justice would not be toppled by the actions of two pirates. "All Marine fleets heading to the East Blue, double your patrol range," a voice barked, orders crackling over the channel as the Navy mobilized to prove its strength. "Raise the alert level to maximum." From the newly built watchtower, a Marine vice admiral bellowed down at the messenger. His voice carried over the wharf, sharp as a cannon blast. "The execution at Logtown cannot be allowed to turn into a free-for-all." The location of the so-called Wave Motion King was classified at the highest level. CP units had been ordered to investigate every lead. More ships, more men, more firepower were streaming in. Everything the Admiralty could spare went into bolstering the defenses for what everyone on the chain of command was calling the end of an era. Out at sea, excitement and unease churned in equal measure. Rumors moved faster than the tide. 3,160,000,000 berries. Is that for real? One deckhand shouted, eyes wide as he passed the number along. Of course it is. Imagine getting just one hair from Kyle, one scrap of proof, and we'd be set for life, another dreamer replied, greed shining brighter than the dawn. Don't be ridiculous, a gruff voice cut in. That's a monster who can square off with Garp and Sengoku themselves. Forget him. Go after the 50,000 berry pirate instead. He's an easy score and won't bite your head off. Before the timid sailor could finish his practical plea, his captain reached over and smacked him on the back of the head. You great coward! This is the age of opportunity, men. Its clouds are gathering, not age of opportunity, the sailor protested weakly. Shut up, the captain snapped, half grin, half reprimand. I'm the captain. All around them, ships cut their anchors abeam and trimmed their sails. Ambitious crews, fortune hunters, and desperate cutthroats, sharks scenting blood in the water, poured into the Grand Line. The sea, restless and hungry, welcomed them. They might not find Kyle. The Dragon Lion Rebellion had shattered the old order and left the seas more chaotic and freer than they'd been in years. The world government and the Marines were entirely absorbed by the looming threat of the Wave Motion King and the fallout from Roger's execution. Their eyes were fixed on the Grand Line and the East Blue, watching for any ripple that might turn into a storm. Under the cover of that frenzy, the course of fate quietly veered off its expected path in a place no one was looking. In the calm of the South Sea, a tiny, unnamed island called Batarilla went almost completely unnoticed. There were no notorious pirates there, no marine outposts, not even a decent harbor. Its people rose with the sun and worked until dusk, content with simple, steady lives. That afternoon, the sun was warm and soft. A pink-haired woman walked slowly along the shore, a basket of fresh fruit balanced in one hand while the other rested on her rounded belly. Her face glowed with the serene, secretive happiness of impending motherhood. A stray gust of sea breeze carried a discarded old newspaper and dropped it at her feet. She bent to pick it up and froze at the front page, a face that was at once familiar and slightly off, and beside it an astronomical bounty. A flicker of worry crossed Rouge's eyes, but it quickly dissolved into a warm, grateful tenderness. Logatown, East Blue, the town of beginnings and ends. Today it felt like it existed only for endings. The sky was leaden, clouds hanging low, as if even the heavens were mourning the king about to fall. The air was still, heavy with humidity and the press of bodies. There wasn't a breath of wind. The crowd filled the plaza, shoulder to shoulder, Every alley and rooftop crowded with curious faces. The smell of sweat, cheap liquor, and tobacco hung thick over everything. In the center of it all, the execution platform rose, stark against the gray sky. It was empty now, but every eye in the throng was fixed on it. People had come from all corners of the seas to witness the end of a legend with their own eyes. A low, restless murmur ran through them, and then converged into a single question. "Is that where the Pirate King is going to be executed?" a young man asked, craning his neck to see over the heads. A burly merchant beside him spat to the side and scoffed, "What Pirate King? He's no king, just a thug leader." "3 of my cargo ships were lost in the Grand Line," the merchant spat, voice tight with anger. "It was probably his men who did it." "You can't say that," an old fisherman in a straw hat answered slowly. "I heard from sailors who sailed with him. The Pirate King, that man. He paid for his drinks and never hurt ordinary folk. He was a straightforward sort." Straightforward. The merchant's neck stiffened. "Call it whatever you like. Stolen money doesn't make a man straightforward." He was about to argue more when a short, tipsy man nearby bellowed, "Quiet! You're blocking my bet." He jabbed a finger toward the scaffold. "I bet he'll die with a smile. Who's in?" The crowd threw a mixture of scornful looks and curious glances. A few busybodies leaned in, voices rising with wagers. "I bet he'll be crying and begging for mercy. 1 gold coin. I bet he'll spit on the Marines." "Hey, any idea where he hid the treasure he never spent?" Their arguments, curses, and wagers braided together like an elegy for a fading age. Across from the execution platform, at the top of the clock tower, a lone figure stood in the shadowed recesses. Aaron Cale wore a plain black trench coat. His hood was pulled low, masking most of his face as he watched the scene below in silence. He didn't bother to hide his presence. He simply melted into the shadow of the rooftops, as if he belonged to the darkness itself. From above, he watched the crowd below with golden, eagle-like eyes. He wasn't actively broadcasting his observation hockey, but some auras were so pronounced they stood out like bonfires in a black forest. Impossible to miss. At the edge of the plaza, a white-haired young man was scowling at the surrounding pirates with all the contempt of someone who seemed to think you lot should be suffocated by smoke. Aaron Cale knew that face, the Marine's rising pillar, the man everyone called Smoker the Smoker. He hardly ever won a fair brawl, yet the promotions kept coming, one of those strange ironies of the age. Aaron couldn't help the grin that tugged at his mouth. "Kid, take your big brother Aaron Cale's advice. You can't handle the smoke. If you insist on smoking anyway, my recommendation is Rick V." Not far off, a tall, thin youth with a chin sharp as an awl threw back his head and let out a strange high cackle. His shadow stretched long in the sunlight, and his presence gave off a distinctly sinister air. The future Shichibukai, Gecko Moria. He still had some of that youthful edge. Kaido hadn't yet turned him into a reclusive, paunchy otaku. I should make time to give him a proper thrashing. Aaron Cale's gaze drifted to a quiet corner. There, a man wrapped head to toe in a dark green cloak sat alone, calm as the air just before a storm. Steamed mud duck, Rue. The revolution hasn't succeeded yet. Comrades still have work to do, Aaron thought with a half-smile. His eyes moved on. A young swordsman in a loud shirt, with eyes like a hawk, carried a huge black blade across his back and idly polished the little quick draw knife that hung around his neck. Nearby, a flash of pink feathers stood out in the crowd, a blond youth in sunglasses, grinning wildly and clearly enjoying the spectacle. Tsk. Annoying. Asking for a beating. And then there was a man with slicked-back hair and cold, calculating eyes, staring fixedly toward the execution platform like a crocodile watching its prey. Crocodile? Ambition really does show on a face. Aaron Cale suddenly remembered a rumor he'd heard. Crocodile had originally been a woman and was later changed by Ivankov. Fragments of other idle chatter drifted into his mind. Someone asking, "Crocodile? Is that why you don't train in hockey?" And, oddly, an offhand, "Brother, you smell so good." He cleared his throat and forced his attention back to the present. At the very front of the crowd, the boy with the red hair and the red-nosed boy, Buggy, were squeezed together, whispering and laughing. Aaron withdrew his gaze and let out a quiet, private sigh. An absurd thought crossed him. Here in Logatown Plaza were the seeds of the future Yonko, future Shichibukai, leaders of the Revolutionary Army, virtually a gathering of tomorrow's legends. If a single buster call swept through now and wiped them all out, the Grand Line might be peaceful for 100 years. No, of course, a buster call probably wouldn't kill them all. His expression shifted. From the attic where he crouched, he could see the man below kneeling in the dusty loft, a suited figure in sunglasses, one hand pressed to a den mushi at his ear, the other clenched on the hilt of the pistol at his waist. His voice came up from below, low, tight, and edged with nervous seriousness. "Yes, we've double-checked the intel," the man in the suit said. "Gecko Moria, Don Quixote do Flamingo. A whole handful of pirates with bounties over 100 million are in the plaza. But the Wave Motion King, Aaron Kale, the one you specifically told us to find, he hasn't been located." There was a trace of relief in his voice. Hunting promising up-and-coming pirates was one thing. Hunting the monster who dared to breach Marineford was another entirely. He hadn't finished the sentence when the wooden ceiling above them rippled, as if something were pushing its way through solid planks. The man's eyes snapped upward. A face, inverted, disturbingly familiar from countless wanted posters, slowly forced its way through the opening. Beneath a deep black hood, two golden pupils gleamed with lazy amusement, regarding him the way a cat regards a mouse that's wandered into a snare. Half of Aaron Kale's body had already squeezed through the attic floor, suspended upside down in midair. He dangled there effortlessly. "Hello." Aaron's voice was soft, almost casual, and yet it hit the man in the suit like a clap of thunder. The suited man's pupils snapped into pinpricks. Every drop of blood in his body seemed to freeze. He wanted to scream, to draw his gun, to run, but an overwhelming fear clamped his throat, stalled his limbs, and wiped his mind clean. "Good night." Aaron Kale's words were casual as he swung his hand in a single, effortless chop. The strike landed with a muted thud. The man didn't even grunt. His eyes rolled back and he crumpled straight backward, kicking up a small cloud of dust as he hit the attic floor. Silence fell again over the room. The abandoned den mushi on the table remained connected, its face frozen in the same terrified expression, mouth agape as if it had witnessed something impossible. Aaron dropped down from the ceiling, landing without a sound. He didn't bother to look at the unconscious CP agent. He simply bent and picked up the den mushi. Moshi, he said into the receiver, casual, as if greeting a friend. "Is this little Wuchuri from Mary Giois?" There was a long, deadly silence on the other end. Someone finally breathed. "Oh my God!" 112, incompetent, 5 old stars. The room of authority in the Holy Land of Mary. Giois was the summit of the world, the absolute center that decided the fate of countless lives. 5 figures, some seated and some standing, watched in silence as the terrified den mushi squirmed on the table at the room's center. The air was as heavy as the ocean's depths, oppressive enough to crush any mortal who dared enter. Nishiro spoke slowly, gripping his long katana. Each syllable seemed hauled up from an ice cellar. "Wave Motion King Aaron Kale, how did you learn our identities?" The voice coming from the den mushi drawled the words with a teasing, nostalgic lilt. "Oh, back at God Valley. My good brother Satan Saint told me himself." At that, the temperature in the room felt as if it dropped 10 degrees. The other 4 elders' gazes snapped to the figure leaning on a cane beneath a flat-brimmed hat. St. J. Garcia Saturn's eye twitched violently. His face went white with indignation. "I am not. I did not. Don't be ridiculous," he sputtered. When, they all wondered, had he become a sworn brother to a mere pirate? During that bloody fight at God Valley, he joked that he wanted to grind every last scoundrel of the Rock's pirates into dust. A soft chuckle from the den mushi cut through the stunned silence that followed, as if answering the unspoken questions in the room. "Just kidding. Don't take me seriously." Kale's tone lightened. "Honestly, I was already showing mercy back then when I didn't cut that troublesome Satan down with a single stroke." Satan Saint went pale. Then his face darkened with fury. He tightened his grip on his cane until the veins in his knuckles stood out. Kale's voice dropped, distant and almost nostalgic. "Actually, Rox told me. He said he went in and out of Mary Giois 7 times back then, and in the Room of Flowers he toyed with Emu like a dog." The words struck the room of authority like a thunderclap. Emu's name was absolute taboo. For the first time, unmasked horror and a cold, murderous intent showed on the faces of the five elders. The air itself seemed to congeal, and an invisible pressure made the chamber shudder. Kale, however, seemed completely oblivious to the white-hot fury crackling on the other end of the Den Mushi. He merely sighed to himself and said softly, "You know, I still respect Rocks, not for treasure, not for glory, because he wanted to overturn the whole world. That man, he was a true pirate." A deathly silence fell over the Hall of Authority. The five elders listening through the Den Mushi sank into a long, tense quiet. Their anger was like a volcano ready to erupt, but some sterner logic held it back. After a long pause, St. Marcus Mars, his long white beard catching the light, spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. "Aaron Kale, we have investigated everything you submitted." His tone betrayed nothing. "Your existence poses an unprecedented threat to the current world order. At the same time, we must acknowledge that attempting to eliminate you completely would exact an unbearable cost." It was a calculated compromise. As St. Ethan Baronverth put it, "Let bygones be bygones." Nusturo cut in crisply. "Your attack on Marineford could be used as a pretext, a provocation, against the Marines." St. Topman Warcury folded his arms and spoke in a deep, bell-like voice. "We could lift your bounty and let you recover Gol D. Rogers' remains for burial." Satan Saint, forcing down the anger in his chest, leaned forward and peered at the Den Mushi. "The world government is preparing an entirely new system to bring some balance to the increasingly lawless seas. A sort of legitimate pirate, someone who may legally plunder, maintain a private armed force, and be officially recognized by the government." He paused, then offered the one thing that would tempt any ambitious pirate. "We call it the 7 Warlords of the Sea." "Aaron Kale," Warcury continued, "we can invite you to be the first of the 7 warlords. You'll receive extraordinary privilege, and become a keystone in maintaining the world's balance." They were trying to domesticate an untamable beast, to slip a gilded chain over a raging monster and turn it into a watchdog for the palace. On the other end of the Den Mushi, Kale was silent. Just when the Gorosei began to think he was weighing their offer, a voice came through, part playful, mostly mocking. "But I refuse." A suffocating silence answered on the other end of the Den Mushi. Through the little snail phone, Kale could almost see the 5 old men at the far end, their faces so dark you could nearly wring water from them. At last, Satan Saint's voice came back over the line, stripped of any pretense of recruitment and carrying only cold menace. "Aaron Kale, you still don't understand your situation. A captain's sins are often paid for by his crew. Even though the Roger Pirates have disbanded, the world government is watching every one of them." He named names like a prosecutor: Dark King Silvers Rayleigh, Demonair Douglas Bullet, and those weak apprentices you keep around. Do you really think we can't find them? A canny politician not only dangles carrots, he applies pressure too. The words were meant to intimidate. What came back instead was a short, incredulous chuckle. "Heh." Kale sounded as if he'd just heard the century's best joke. "Have you been living in Mary Geoy so long your brains have rusted?" His tone was lazy and mocking. "Have you perhaps misunderstood something? The Roger Pirates didn't die off," Kale said. "They disbanded." Then his tone shifted. The easy arrogance and controlled cool that had masked him fell away like a cloak, revealing something hard and gleaming beneath, an exposed blade. "Or," he added, voice cold and deliberate, "would you like to see what we look like when we put ourselves back together?" The Gorosei in the room of authority narrowed their eyes, their pupils contracted as if struck. Reassemble? The thought alone clawed at them. The Roger Pirates, those monsters who had made the world government and the Marines writhe with uneasy fear, the crew that carved a path across the Grand Line and reached the final island, reforming under any pretext born of the government's pressure. The consequences were too terrible to fully imagine. On both ends of the Den Mushi, the positions shifted instantly. What had been an offensive negotiation on one side became defensive on the other. The stalemate that followed was thick and absolute. The silence dragged on until Kale finally broke it, almost bored by their paralysis. "Listen, old-timers," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "I'll be blunt. I haven't been to Laugh Tale. I don't care about your hidden blank 100 years. And whether the D stands for destiny, doom, or anything else, you can keep your mysteries. None of that is why I'm here. Whether a family lives or dies is none of my concern. Everything I do isn't to inherit someone's will, and it's not for power or wealth. Kale paused, then enunciated each word like a verdict. I only do what I want to do. It's that simple. So stop with the patronizing deals and the threats. Listen carefully. These are my terms. No, consider this a declaration. First, I will take Captain Roger's remains. Second, I will kill celestial dragons on sight, whether they're out in the Grand Line or hiding in Mary Geoise. I want both, and I want you to stand there and watch helplessly while I take them. Those words had shed arrogance. They were something darker, open defiance, trampling the authority that ruled the world. For a moment, the line was still. Want to kill me? Kale's voice softened into a smile, the kind a hunter wears when he sees his prey. You're welcome to try. All 5 of you can come at me together. I won't object. No, don't wait, he added, and the threat became almost casual. I'll come to Mary Geoise myself to find you. There was a small, final click. The call ended. Silence settled over the attic. Kale walked to the window and looked past the layers of people. Below, his gaze finally landing on the cold, empty execution platform standing in the square. The clamor, the shouting, the curses from the square seemed to recede into the distance. In his golden eyes, the playfulness, arrogance, and lethal edge he'd worn during his earlier confrontation with the Gorosei had all drained away, leaving only a single, complicated feeling. He remembered, years earlier, standing on the deck of the Oro Jackson. The man in the straw hat would down rum and bellow in that familiar, booming voice. Kale, don't keep scowling. Smile. We're going to be the freest people on this sea. Freedom, huh? Chapter 113. Farewell, One Piece. They're here. They're here. The shout cut through the square, and the noisy crowd froze for a single heartbeat before erupting into even greater chaos. People surged forward like a tide, straining their necks and standing on tiptoe so they wouldn't miss what was about to happen. Escorted by 2 squads of Marine elites, a man walked slowly into view. He wasn't wearing the coarse prison uniform that marked his crime. He still wore his iconic red captain's coat. Seastone shackles clamped his hands together in front of him, but his steps were steady, as if he were taking a leisurely stroll through his own backyard. Gol D. Roger. His face, weathered by years at sea, showed none of the fear or defeat anyone might expect from a condemned man. Instead, there was a calm, almost joyful smile. He scanned the crowd, faces bright with excitement, twisted with hatred, masked by fear, or simply full of curiosity, and took it all in with a gaze as placid as the sea of the calm belt. Is that the legendary Pirate King? Someone whispered. He looks different from how I imagined. He's about to die, and yet he's smiling. The murmurs began again, softer this time, threaded with a strange, reverent awe. From the shadowed attic above the square, Kale watched in silence. He walked through the crowd, each step a beat in the era's pulse. At the foot of the clock tower, his pace faltered. He tilted his head slightly and fixed his gaze on the shadow where Kale crouched. Their eyes met. Kale's pupils narrowed almost imperceptibly. Roger's smile widened a little, and he went on, climbing the stairway that would lead to his end. Kale looked away, unable to watch any longer. In the square, the men who would one day shape the world watched with different expressions. Gecko Moriah's face was twisted with morbid glee. He stuck out his long tongue and licked his lips as if savoring a top-tier horror. Doflamingo stood with his hands in his pockets, the corners of his mouth beneath his sunglasses pulled into an exaggerated grin. Foo. What a grand performance, he murmured. Crocodile drew on his cigar, eyes cold and calculating. He didn't care who died, only about the power vacuum this man's death would open on the seas and the opportunities that would follow. At the very front of the crowd, the red-haired boy clenched his fists. Tears blurred his vision beneath his straw hat, but he bit his lip and kept silent. The red-nosed boy beside him had no such restraint. He sobbed so hard snot bubbles formed at his nose. Wah! Captain Roger, he wailed. On the execution platform, Roger knelt with an oddly grand air and beckoned to the 2 expressionless executioners, standing with long blades at his sides. All right, hurry up and do it, he said, as if urging a barkeep to bring the drinks faster rather than preparing for his own execution. The two executioners exchanged a glance, tightened their grips on the hilts, and stepped forward, one on each side, raising their shining swords and aiming them at Roger's neck. The square fell so utterly silent you could have heard a pin drop. Somewhere above Logatown, thick dark clouds had gathered, pressing down with the threat of a storm, heavy, menacing, suffocating. Then, breaking the stillness, someone in the crowd shouted, "Hey, Pirate King! Where did you hide all the treasure you found? Is it really in the Grand Line? You did find it, didn't you? The legendary treasure! One Piece!" Roger smiled faintly and lifted his head. In the last moments of his life, his eyes glittered like stars. "Do you want my treasure?" he asked. His voice cut through the heavy clouds and carried to every ear in the square. Through the Den Den Mushi, it spread to every corner of the sea. "If you want it, you can have it all." Fleet Admiral Kong's pupils snapped tight. He crushed the railing with his hands, veins standing out on his forehead. "Go find it," he barked. Roger's voice rose like thunder. "I left everything in the world there. For a heartbeat, the whole world's sea." Med to freeze. Then Kong's enraged roar came. Too late. He tried to reassert control. "Fools! Hurry up! Execute him!" But his words were swallowed by a rising roar from the crowd. The command echoed around the square and sounded small, powerless against the storm Roger had set loose. The executioners, cowed by Roger's presence, hesitated for half a beat. Only when the order finally came did they snap awake and swing their long blades with full force. Swish! Two cold flashes of steel crossed in the air. For a moment time seemed to stop. Roger's smile froze, immortal in that instant. A single drop of warm blood fell from the high execution platform, struck the wooden planks, and bloomed like a crimson flower. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The world felt muted, and then everything exploded. Oh! A rising cry tore through the square. He was telling the truth. One Piece really exists. Pirate King. I'm going to be the Pirate King. To the sea! I want to go to the sea! The crowd went wild. The port itself seemed to erupt. Countless eyes ignited with feverish longing. People threw down their tools, kissed crying loved ones goodbye, and stampeded toward the docks in a frantic rush for the wealth and adventure they'd been promised. The square dissolved into chaos, the crowd behaving like possessed men and women, and the Marines' defensive line collapsed in an instant. So began a greater age, the Great Pirate Era. For a moment, the crowd was lost in the madness and dreams that One Piece had unleashed. The next moment, everyone went completely silent. It wasn't the Marines silencing them, and it wasn't a sudden return of reason. The sky itself had changed, not the red gold of sunset, but an obscene, inky blackness that swallowed the light. The clouds that had been merely gloomy a heartbeat before now spun and rushed together, visibly collapsing into a vast, horrifying vortex directly above Logatown. Lightning crawled along the cloud edges, throwing off a crackling hiss. Yet there was no thunder, only a mounting, heart-stopping pressure. A ferocious wind rose from the ground, sharpening into a high, keening shriek like a chorus of vengeful spirits. People in the square were tossed about. The feverish excitement that had gripped them moments ago gave way to blank terror and confusion. What's happening?" someone stammered. The sky's falling." A pale, white bolt of lightning ripped the heavens open, blinding the plaza with daylight-bright intensity. When the light died away, the crowd found their eyes drawn to the execution platform. Someone had appeared there, seemingly in an instant. A black trench coat snapped in the gale. 2 golden eyes gleamed from beneath the brim, cold and unblinking. Torrential rain hammered the square, cold sheets of water striking the ground and stinging faces. The whole world was wrapped in that downpour, except for the high execution platform, which seemed sealed off by some invisible barrier. The rain parted mysteriously around Roger. Water slid to either side, leaving a dry patch roughly 3 feet across, not a single drop falling on his crimson captain's coat. Kale stood in the rain, letting it wash his face. He knelt slowly, reached out, and brushed Roger's face, still wearing that calm, almost smiling expression. Every eye in the square was on them. Then something even more impossible happened. The blood that had pooled on the wooden board, the bright, ugly blossom of red, stirred as if it had a will of its own. The streaks writhed together, drew into a fine thread, and crept back along the path they had taken, flowing into Roger's wounds as if time itself were running backward. Cale moved with care. He hooked one of Roger's arms over his shoulder, slid his other arm beneath the dead man's bent knees, and lifted him onto his back. Roger's head lay peacefully against Cale's back, just as it always had after too many drinks at a banquet, like a man carried to his ship by friends, merely asleep. Rain and wind hissed around them, and a near inaudible voice, "K," ut through the storm. "You didn't get any thinner and impel down either, you bastard, Roger." Cale straightened, hoisting the captain's body more securely, and started to turn away. "Stop!" A roar rose above the wind and rain. "It's Aaron Cale, the Wave Motion King, that legendary monster, the one who ruined Marineford." The Marines at the edge of the crowd snapped to attention, guns raised, though their trembling hands betrayed how afraid they were. The pirates, however, grew visibly wilder. Greed sharpened their faces into something hungry. "Brothers, Roger's treasure clue must be on him," someone shouted. "Kill him, take Roger's corpse, and one piece will be ours. He's only one man. Down him, we'll be famous across the seas." Want drove them like a fuse. In an instant, a dozen self-styled great pirates surged forward from the mob, swords drawn and eyes alight with ferocity, charging straight for the execution platform. They meant to trample the corpses of two legends to climb to the top of the age. At the far edge of the square, Doflamingo's smile fell away, replaced by a dangerous, unreadable solemnity. Crocodile's cigar clattered from his fingers and hit the flagstones. My hawk, Hawkeye, already had his right hand on the hilt of the black blade slung across his back. They saw it more clearly than the other fools gathered there. This was no opponent to be provoked. Cale didn't spare them a backward glance. Calm and steady, he began to carry Roger down the steps from the execution platform. The instant his foot touched the first step, something centered on him unfurled with a roar, invisible yet fatally tangible. The air thickened as if a god-king had opened an indifferent eye, or a demon of the abyss had curved a contemptuous smile. Black and gold motes of light shimmered into being, weaving and colliding in the space around him. They radiated an overwhelming dominance, a will to crush everything in their path, and spread outward like a storm. The feral smiles on the dozen pirates in the front row froze in an instant. The light went out of their eyes. They pitched backward, foam at their mouths, and lay unconscious. That, however, was only the beginning. A black and gold wave of hockey rolled across the square like a tsunami. Dull thuds followed in its wake. Pirates and Marines alike fell, row after row, as if a scythe had passed through a field of wheat. In barely 3 seconds, the tens of thousands packed into the square were reduced to motionless bodies. Apart from the wind and the rain, only the muffled thuds of collapsing figures remained. Logtown, which had been a roar a heartbeat before, was suddenly as silent as a tomb. Cale did not pause. He descended the last step and set foot on the rain-soaked ground, sending ripples across the pooled water. He walked through the fallen as if they weren't there. Only a handful of people in the whole square remained standing or on their knees. The red-haired boy and the red-nosed boy, Buggy, were huddled on their knees, gasping, staring at that familiar back. Rain and tears mingled on their faces until they were indistinguishable. Gecko Moria collapsed to the ground, dazed, muttering to himself, "It's a lie, this." Crocodile was half kneeling nearby, one hand braced on the earth, his face drained of color. Doflamingo fought to stay on his feet. His legs trembled as if they might give out, and the eyes behind his sunglasses were bloodshot. Hawkeye Mihawk remained standing, his black blade slung across his back. Every muscle was taut, his right hand clenched on the hilt, his hawk-like gaze fixed on the figure walking away. A bead of cold sweat traced down his temple. Cale didn't look at any of them. Cradling his captain, he moved slowly through the wind and rain, stepping over countless unconscious bodies. Behind him, the terrible vortex of dark clouds began to break. The rain eased, and a shaft of sunlight pierced the sky, illuminating a town full of corpses. It felt as if the apocalyptic storm had come only to bid farewell to a king of an era. The rain in Logatown had finally eased. Rippling puddles blurred the reflections of people as those stunned by Conqueror's hockey slowly came to. They sat up in a daze, rubbing aching foreheads, the lingering shock of that man, the one who had borne the weight of an era, still raw in their minds. Marines moved to restore order while the pirates, shaken but inflamed anew by Roger's last words, began hunting for ships, preparing to rush out toward that vast, unknown voyage. In a quiet corner away from the crowds, Shanks and Buggy sat side by side on damp stone steps. Neither spoke. Buggy's sobbing had stopped, but his shoulders still trembled occasionally. He looked lost, unmoored. Shanks kept his emotions tightly under control. His straw hat tipped low, so the shadow hid his face and made his expression unreadable. After a long, heavy silence, Buggy finally spoke, his voice thick and nasal. "Hey, Shanks." Big brother Kyle, he took Captain away." What are we going to do now?" Buggy glanced up at Shanks's profile, something like hope in his eyes. "We promised, remember? We'd form our own pirate crew, and then go to Laughtail." Shanks was silent for a long moment. He didn't answer right away. He raised his head slowly and stared toward the direction Kyle had gone, where the sea met the sky. That silence made Buggy uneasy. "Shanks?" "Buggy," Shanks said at last, his voice rough. I'm not going. Not for now." "Huh?" The hope on Buggy's face froze into disbelief. "What did you say? What do you mean, not going?" "I'm still a pirate," Shanks replied, turning to look at him with an unusually serious expression. "I'll still sail, but Laughtail, I'm not going there. Not yet." Buggy sprang up from the steps, jabbing a finger at Shanks's nose as if to puncture the absurdity. His voice sharpened. "Say that again. Do you even know what kind of nonsense you're talking?" "I didn't say never." Shanks answered quietly as he rose, meeting Buggy's glare without flinching. "I said not now." "Enough," Buggy cut him off, voice raw. His chest heaved, his cheeks flushed a violent red as fury and hurt crowded out any reason. "I had it all planned." His words came out in a choked rush. "Once you formed your crew, I'd be your first mate. We'd sail together and finish what the captain couldn't, what he left unfinished." He trailed off, but the wounded pride and betrayal were plainly written across his face. He had believed they would lean on each other, share the same destiny, follow the same dream. Now, at the very beginning, his closest friend was telling him they were to part ways. "So now that Captain's gone, and Big Brother Kyle is gone, you think no one can tell you what to do anymore, so you'll just walk away?" Buggy's voice rose. "You think the dream doesn't matter anymore?" "It's not like that, Buggy." Shanks' brows drew together. He tried to keep his voice level. "Captain Roger is Captain Roger, and I am me." Buggy laughed, a bitter sound. "What does that even mean? You call yourself a pirate and then claim you can't share the same dream? You're making excuses." Shanks didn't meet the bait. He looked instead at the strip of sea visible beyond the dock, where the light was beginning to scatter into gold. "Roger taught me a lot. He taught me what it means to be brave, and he taught me to trust my crew. But I won't be his shadow, Buggy. His course was his, grand and terrible in ways I can't follow. I have my own way to go. I won't take the helm of your ship because I don't want to steer by someone else's map." "You're turning your back on everything." Buggy's shoulders shook. "You said we'd go together. You said—" "I did say that," Shanks interrupted gently. "And I meant it in my own way. But loyalty isn't the same as copying someone else's life. If you want to make me your first mate because you want a mirror of yourself standing by your side, I can't be that. If you want a friend who will celebrate your victories and call you on your mistakes, I'm here. But I won't stand with you because you demand I be who I'm no. T." Buggy's mouth twisted, his hand clenched around the pommel of his dagger until his knuckles paled. For a long heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The harbor sounds, ropes creaking, gulls crying, filled the space between them like witnesses. "Is that it?" Buggy asked finally, voice low. "You'd rather be alone than stand beside me?" Shanks looked at him, and for the first time there was an edge of something like pleading in his eyes. "I'll never be alone as long as I have my friends. But I won't be part of a plan that asks me to lose myself. If our paths cross again, if we sail the same waters, I won't turn away. I just can't promise to fit inside the role you've already written for me." Buggy stared, some of the heat draining from his face. A scowl remained, but beneath it was something rawer, fear, maybe, of being left behind. He took a step back as if the words had struck him, then spun on his heel and stalked off along the quay without another word. His heavy boots slapped against the planks, and when he disappeared into the crowd, he left a silence that felt thicker than any argument. Shanks watched him go, the light catching the edge of his jaw. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and then turned to the sea. Roger's voice echoed in his memory. Distant, stubborn, impossibly large. Shanks squared his shoulders, not from resolution, but from the quiet knowledge that the road ahead would have to be walked on his own terms. Behind him, the harbor's noises stitched themselves back together. Ahead, the horizon waited, open and indifferent. I have to walk my own path. He held out his hand to Buggy, the way he had 100 times before. Come out to sea with me, Buggy. We'll be the best of friends, just like before. Buggy stared at the outstretched hand as if it were the most absurd thing he had ever seen, and a hysterical laugh bubbled up. Your path? He scoffed. Your path is to betray the captain's dream? The laughter died instantly. A cold, hard silence fell between them. From his coat, Buggy drew a dagger, an old blade with a small ruby set into its hilt, a keepsake Roger had once given him, and one he had always treasured. Shanks' pupils tightened. Buggy, you, he began. Buggy didn't answer. For a moment, the pain in his eyes flickered, then determination took over. He raised the dagger high and with all his strength drove the tip across the damp stone path. The blade grated loudly, carving a clear line into the ground, a visible divide between them. Captain, he really misjudged you, Shanks. Buggy cried, voice choked with tears he refused to let fall. He looked at the pale gouge in the dirt, then at Shanks, who stood frozen, and without another word he turned abruptly away. I don't care, he yelled at the top of his lungs, his back to Shanks, as if speaking to him and to himself both. You just wait. Even without you, I'll put together my own crew. I'll find the One Piece and inherit the captain's will. I will become the Pirate King. With that, he strode off without looking back, charging down a side alley and vanishing around the corner. Only Shanks remained, standing in the same spot. He lowered his head and stared at the stark white slash at his feet. The closest friend he had grown up with, the one who had shared his first steps, had chosen an entirely different path. After a long moment, Shanks raised his hand and pressed the straw hat down on his head. The brim threw a deeper shadow over his face. He did not follow, and he said nothing. Only the tightness in his clenched fist betrayed the turmoil inside him. A small, nameless island lay elsewhere, too insignificant to appear on shipping routes, barely a smudge on any chart. The sea breeze was salty and free, skimming over the green grass and whispering around a simple grave. There was no headstone or epitaph, just a flat slab set flush with the earth. Kyle sat on the slope of the hill in front of it, one knee drawn up, a bottle of good rum in his hand. He twisted off the cap and let the smell, warm, sweet, alive, mix with the scent of the grass. He poured a slow, steady line of amber liquid onto the soil before the slab. The rum beaded and soaked in, darkening the earth as if sharing a drink with the friend who slept beneath. Then he leaned his shoulder against the cool stone and looked up. The sky was impossibly clear here, the blue cleaner than anywhere else he could remember. Voices rose in his memory, unbidden and bright. Little Kyle, I've got my eye on you. Want to come out to sea with us? See what the real ocean is like. Kyle, don't always scowl. Look at you so young, but you frown like an old man. You're older than that geezer Rayleigh. Kyle, your bounty's gone up again. We're having a feast. A rough chuckle followed, raw and familiar. Kuahaha! I don't know either. The laughter and the voices braided with the breeze, and for a moment Kyle couldn't tell where the past ended and the present began. But that's exactly what makes an adventure fun. The line echoed in his head. Kyle looked down at the small mound of earth and said aloud, "The Pirate King's brother is free." For a moment, the sea seemed to answer him. Or maybe it was only his imagination, because a soft, almost familiar whisper came back. Thank you, Kyle." His eyelids drooped, hiding the swirl of emotions in his eyes. He grabbed the wine bottle, tilted it back, and let the burning liquid chase the ache in his throat. It helped nothing. His chest still felt hollow. He talked to the grave as if it were an old companion. "Honestly, if I'd known you were going to die so easily, I should have had Kuzan freeze you, body and all, back then." He paused, pouting like a child continuing a half-formed argument. "No, wait. I think I kicked him in the kidney at Marineford. He probably still holds a grudge. Wouldn't have helped us anyway." A gust of salt-laced breeze ruffled the grass. The blades whispered against one another, like a chorus. And you, leaving so casually without even saying where you wanted to be buried. What if someone digs you up out here in the middle of nowhere? His voice carried a teasing edge, the kind you use when scolding a fool you can't help loving. Seriously, do you have any idea how much Shanks and Buggy cried in Logtown? He added, half accusing, half fond. Me? The word hung in the air, as if the dead could really answer. Kyle raised his hand and wiped at the damp at the corner of his eye. He snorted and turned his face away. How could a real man ever shed tears? The sea breeze was gentle, and the sun sat just right. Everything was quiet except for his own voice, which seemed to hang in the air. After a long silence, he drained the last of the wine, carelessly tossed the empty bottle aside, and rose to his feet. He brushed grass clippings from his clothes, took one last look at the perfectly ordinary grave, and allowed a faint smile. Good night, Roger. Kyle kept his back as straight as ever, but in the bright sunlight, he looked a little lonely. His journey wasn't finished. He had to protect the captain's bloodline. Batlarilla Island, he murmured, eyes drifting to the distant horizon. The calm nostalgia in his golden pupils slowly faded. I hope Garp hasn't come knocking by the time I get there. Chapter 115, Luju South Sea, Batlarilla Island. Unlike the islands of the Grand Line, with their volatile weather and hidden dangers, this place enjoyed a perpetual spring, mild breezes off the sea, sun warming the flawless white sand. Smoke curled gently from the small town's chimneys, children's laughter echoed down the lanes as they chased one another, and housewives exchanged the day's gossip. Everything felt easy and safe. Aaron Kale walked the cobblestone path in plain, casual clothes. The naginata on his back was disguised by the way his travel bag and the light fell over it. His golden pupils had lost their usual edge, softening his features until he looked like any ordinary tourist, harmless to people and animals alike. He let himself think, not without a touch of amusement, that this was the kind of place one could retire to. He breathed in. No tang of gunpowder, no metallic scent of blood, only the faint perfume of flowers and the briny tang of the sea. Since taking Roger's remains in Logatown, he'd been careful to cover his trails. It had taken several days to reach this remote South Sea island, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. No need to be so careful. If I simply killed everyone who could trace me back here, no one would ever know I'd been. Well, not that I actually would. Still, I owe a lot to that assault on Marineford. If that hadn't happened a little while ago, leaving Marine HQ tied up with repairs and stabilization, things would be very different. By now, the Marines across the world government would be combing through anything connected to Roger like sharks to blood. Instead, the high command is stretched thin, pulled in every direction by the chaos of the newly opened Great Pirate Era. And Kong is probably still drafting his mandatory self-criticism over the so-called Logatown execution incident. No one is looking for an obscure little island, and no one would have suspected that Roger's wife, Porcus D. Rouge, lives here. Aaron Kale stopped in front of a small, sea-facing house. Its walls were painted a warm off-white. Sheets billowed quietly on a line in the yard, stirred by the ocean breeze, and pots of sunflowers clustered on the windowsill, bright in the sunlight. This was the place. Aaron Kale froze at the door, his hand hovering inches from the wood. He had rehearsed this moment 100 different ways on the walk over. How do you begin a conversation like this? What do you say first? Hello, Rouge G. I'm Roger's younger brother. He's gone, and I've come to take you away. My condolences. I'm Aaron Kale. Roger passed away peacefully. No, that sounded like a death knell. He mentally smacked himself. What kind of overwrought sermon was that? All the lines he'd imagined came out either stilted or embarrassingly poetic. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a frustrated breath. This was harder than storming Marineford. At least invading Marineford only required swinging a naginata. Comforting someone required finesse, timing, the right words, and God knew what else. Aaron hated situations like this. If Rouge broke down at the sight of him, crying for Roger, what then? Handkerchief? An awkward pat on the shoulder? Empty platitudes he didn't even believe. They're in a better place? You must be strong, life goes on, felt like cruel cliches. So there he stood, locked in indecision, listening to his own internal monologue spiral, when the door in front of him made a soft, protesting creak and opened a crack. Aaron Cale stopped dead, his thoughts evaporating as if he'd turned into an awkward child caught in a room full of unfamiliar New Year guests. A cautious eye slipped through the crack in the door. Their gazes met, and every prepared line in his head vanished. After a long, fumbling pause, he managed to force out a few dry syllables. He stammered, eyes drifting toward the sunflowers nearby. The weather is really nice, isn't it? The woman behind the door had long, soft pink hair, a smattering of gentle freckles, and clear, warm eyes. Aaron scrambled for his composure. I'm Roger's younger brother, Aaron Cale. Rouge, I'm here to take you to a safer place. He didn't dare look at her face, braced for sadness and tears. But the expected crying never came. Rouge only looked slightly surprised, then recognition dawned in her warm eyes. She looked Aaron Cale up and down, her gaze lingering on his unusual golden pupils for a moment before she nodded. So you're Aaron Cale, she said with a tone that suggested, I knew it. Please come in. Huh? Oh, Aaron answered, a little bewildered, and followed her into the house. The interior was simply furnished, but spotlessly clean, warm, and lived in. Rouge gestured for him to sit on the sofa, then went to the kitchen to pour tea. Her reaction was nothing like what he'd expected. He sat awkwardly on the sofa, feeling uneasy all over, and watched her moving about. For a moment he didn't know what to say. Don't be nervous, Rouge said, coming back with 2 steaming cups. She set one on the coffee table in front of him. When he was home, I used to hear Roger talk about you all the time. She took the chair opposite him, cradling her cup between both hands, a soft smile on her face. He said he had the most outstanding, most reliable younger brother in the world. Every time he saw a newspaper with your latest bounty poster, he'd get like a child, constantly showing it to me and saying, Look, that's my brother. This is my younger brother. Rouge's voice was soft and kind, like the sea breeze slipping through an open window. She wasn't hysterical, she didn't sob, she spoke with a calmness that made it sound like she was simply recalling an ordinary memory. Only when she said Roger's name did a brief shadow appear at the corner of her eye, betraying the deep sorrow she otherwise kept hidden. The steadier she seemed, the more unsettled Aaron Cale felt. The bitterness he had forced down in Logatown, the numbness numbed further by drink at the grave on that lonely island, finally found a crack to leak through. Without warning, his eyes reddened. He bent his head to the steam curling up from his teacup. His voice came out hoarse, as if from something caught in his throat. I'm sorry, Rouge G. I couldn't bring him back. Silence fell. Aaron clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles whitened, and for a moment it seemed nothing would break the stillness, until Rouge sighed softly. It's okay, Aaron Cale. She set her teacup down and looked at him with gentleness. This isn't your fault. Roger chose that path himself. It was his will as the Pirate King. She spoke gently, offering comfort to a man even the world government had labeled troublesome. He wouldn't have wanted to see you like this. He was smiling when he left, wasn't he? Aaron Cale looked up suddenly and met her clear, steady eyes. There was no accusation there, only patience and understanding. In that instant he saw, as if again, the foolish captain who always wore a wide grin and talked about freedom. They were so different, and yet so much the same. Like a trax-like. Cale watched the helpless, proud smile on Rouge's face and felt the enormous stone that had been sitting in his chest crumble into dust. He let out a long breath and finally relaxed. Rouge, we can't stay here long. Even though the world government is in chaos right now, someone clueless could still follow the trail and find us. Pack your things. We need to go. Rouge nodded without hesitation. Okay, just give me a moment. She stood and went into the bedroom. A minute later, she came back carrying a single small bundle. Cale blinked in surprise. That's all? Yes, just a few changes of clothes. Rouge set the package on the table, then turned back to the bedroom with a far more serious air. From a hidden compartment beneath the bed, she drew out a long, carefully wrapped object, swaddled in layers of fine silk. The silk was Roger's favored fiery red, embroidered in gold thread with the Pirate King's skull. Gently, as if handling something fragile and sacred, Rouge laid it on the table and began to unwrap it, peeling back the silk layer by layer. The first thing that caught his eye was a simple Western sword. Its scabbard was a deep, dark red, braided with gold patterns that flashed like living flames under the indoor light. Even sheathed, the blade seemed to radiate a keen, compelling edge. Beside the long sword lay a compact flintlock pistol, its wood a warm ivory that somehow softened the weapon's cold purpose. Cale froze. He knew them at once. They were Roger's favorites, the sword Ace and the pistol Anne. "They're Roger's," Cale said, his voice a little dry. "He left them for you." Rouge's eyes were soft as spring water as she ran her hand over the cool scabbard, as if remembering. "Before he left for Subodi Archipelago last time," she murmured, "he dug these out and said, 'Cale always uses a battered knife. It's not presentable. I have to give him my treasures.'" She smiled helplessly at the memory. "But that idiot, when he was leaving, he got so wrapped up talking nonsense to me that he completely forgot about them. He's always like that, losing things, forgetting stuff. It's such a headache." There was no reproach in her voice, only warmth and fondness. "Now they're back where they belong." Rouge pushed the longsword and pistol toward Cale. He reached out, fingertips brushing the sword's hilt and the gun's cold, engraved metal. For a moment, the memory of that man's booming laugh flashed before his eyes. Cale fastened the longsword, Ace, and the pistol, Anne, to either side of his waist. Then, as if by some miracle, the light around them warped and the air hummed faintly. In the next heartbeat, the two weapons blurred into the background and vanished, swallowed by the air itself. When it was done, Cale stood and prepared to take Rouge away. "Oh, right, Cale." Rouge's voice faltered as she remembered. "Roger said before he left that Mr. Garp would come to protect me. Are we really just going to leave like this? Garp?" Cale's mouth twitched and a subtle expression crossed his face. "You mean that old coot? Forget it." He waved a hand dismissively. "He may be strong, but his status as the marine hero is too sensitive. If Garp shows up, it would attract far more attention than we want. It's likely as soon as you take them away, world government agents will show up at your door to check things," Cale said smoothly. "Professional matters require professional people. Besides, that old bastard is never reliable. If you count on him, it'll be too late." "Who are you calling an old bastard behind my back, you little brat?" a voice roared. A moment later, a thunderous explosion shattered the calm. With a deafening boom, the side of the small house ruptured as if it were made of paper, leaving a massive, human-shaped gap blown clean through the wall. Bricks and mortar flew in all directions, and smoke and dust billowed into the air. A hulking figure stormed in, radiating a terrifying aura. His fist, about the size of a cooking pot, was sheathed in pitch-black armament hockey and rocketed toward the back of Cale's head. The blow promised enough force to split the island in two, but it met only empty air. Cale moved like a ghost, slipping several meters away with Rouge at his side, narrowly avoiding the full force of the attack. Cale even had time to wave his hand, using the gust to scatter the dust in front of him. He clicked his tongue and eyed the man standing in the gap in the wall, still frozen in a punching pose, as if daring him to move. "Garp, you old immortal! Is that how you greet people? You've gone and wrecked houses all the way down in the South Blue." Garp finally drew his fist back, blew off some non-existent dust, and fixed Cale with a fierce, tigerish glare. "Bah! I'm here to pick someone up. What are you doing here, kid? Did you start the commotion in Logtown?" "I start it?" Cale planted his feet. "That was your boss's doing. The public execution went sideways. How can you blame me? And don't talk to me about picking someone up. By the time you showed up, Rouge's kid would have been old enough to run errands." "What did you say?" Garp's veins popped at his temple. He bellowed, mishearing on purpose. "I said you're old. Are your ears packing up on you?" Cale stepped in front of Rouge and angled his body protectively. Rouge, standing behind him, watched the two legendary figures bicker like squabbling old men with a mixture of amusement and helplessness. She tugged at Cale's sleeve and murmured, "Cale, Mr. Garp, please don't make this worse." "Garp, he means no harm." "Whether he means no harm, I don't know, but he's definitely crazy," Cale muttered under his breath. Garp's ears pricked at the insult. He exploded into a thunderous roar. "You little brat, say that again and see what happens." "Say it again and you'll be sorry," Cale shot back. Before the two of them could crash into each other, Rouge stepped between them. All right, enough. Don't start fighting, she said, voice firm. Garp's fierceness instantly softened when he saw her. He scratched the back of his head, baring a row of white teeth, and broke into a booming laugh. Sorry, Miss Rouge. Did I scare you? It's mainly this brat here that gets me riled up. Kale rolled his eyes. After the brief skirmish, they finally settled down to talk, cramped against a wall that now had a large hole in it from the earlier commotion. Both Garp and Kale had been sent by Roger to protect Rouge. Neither had any intention of letting her out of their sight. Garp, casually picking his nose as if to underline his indifference, asked, So where are you planning to take Rouge? To somewhere secret, Kale replied, his tone icy. Somewhere no one will know her. She needs a place to safely have the baby, and I'm not letting a walking disaster like you anywhere near her. He finished with a derisive laugh. You talk as if you're some kind of saint, Garp snorted. You're Aaron Kale, the wave motion king who made a mess of Marineford. The whole world is watching you. Miss Rouge will be in the most danger if she's with you. She's still safer with me than with you, a marine hero, Kale shot back. Wherever you go, trouble follows. You what? Kale countered, and for a long beat, the two men simply glared at each other, sparks of outrage crackling between them. In the end, Garp was the first to back down. He sighed, and for once his voice lost its usual bluster and went quiet and serious. All right, listen. I know a place that will be absolutely safe. Kale raised an eyebrow, prompting him to continue. Fuchsia Village, in the East Blue, Garp said. It's my hometown. Small, remote, peaceful. And most importantly, nobody would ever think the Pirate King's bloodline was hidden there. I'll talk to the village chief. He'll look after her. It will be foolproof. Kale considered the offer. It was far better than dragging a pregnant woman across the world like a headless chicken. The East Blue was the weakest of the four seas, far from the fighting, and Fuchsia was Garp's own village. With my connections, the plan's safe, Kale said at last. He nodded. But I'm escorting her myself. I don't trust you, old man. What if you go daft halfway and steer us off to Marineford? Me? Sail to Marineford? Nonsense. Garp jumped to his feet, indignant. In the end, the three of them set off at once. Kale and Garp would jointly escort Rouge to Fuchsia Village in the East Blue. A few days later, Fuchsia Village lay quiet beneath a row of slowly turning windmills. The little town hugged the bay, the air sweet with grass and sea. Thanks to Garp's arrangements, everything went smoothly. Rouge, now using the name Luna, settled in without trouble. With some of the savings she'd brought, she rented a vacant shop next to the tavern at the village entrance and turned it into a small flower shop. A flower shop? A girl popped her head around the door with a friendly smile and a kerchief tied over her hair. Makino, the tavern owner's daughter, looked delighted. Yes. Rouge, Luna, gave a shy smile. I know how to arrange them. Makino's face lit up. That's wonderful. This village really needed a flower shop. If you ever need anything, you can always come to me, Makino said with a warm smile. Makino was the kind of person who meant it. With her help, Luna's flower shop opened quickly. Baskets of fragrant blooms, fresh picked from the back mountain, filled the little shop, bringing a burst of color to the quiet village. The villagers took to their gentle, soft-spoken new neighbor almost at once. Kale and Garp lingered in the village for 2 days, watching Rouge settle into a simple, steady routine. Only when they were satisfied did a sense of relief finally wash over them. That night they stood on the cliff overlooking the sea. The moon glinted on the water. A cool breeze tugged at their coats. Everything set? Kale asked. Garp's voice was unusually serious. I've already told them over there. I said I found traces of Roger's widow and that I'm investigating. And then, Garp grinned, flashing white teeth. Then Aaron Kale, the so-called wave motion king, suddenly appeared. To seize Roger's widow, he fought it out with marine hero Monkey D. Garp on a deserted island. The island sank in the end, but Kale escaped with the woman and vanished without a trace. Kale cracked a smile. Sounds like awful B-grade melodrama. They'll believe it. Garp's eyes went sharp. They stood on a wind-swept ridge of a nameless, deserted island in the Grand Line. The sky was a bruised gray, lightning knitting the clouds together as thunder rolled across the sea. If the two of us go at it, hell, if we tear half this island apart, no one in the world government will bat an eye, Kale said, easy and confident. Even if we end up overturning half of Marineford again, they still won't suspect a thing. Garp grinned, cracking his knuckles. By your tone, you mean to make it real, he asked. The old man flexed. As his fist clenched, a pitch-black sheen of armament hockey crawled up and coated his entire arm like lacquer. If we don't fight for real, how are we going to fool those idiots? Perfect. This old man wants to see how much you've improved since Marineford. Kale reached behind his back and drew his naginata. The blade flashed a cold, steely light under the moon, casting a thin arc of silver. He smiled, arrogant and amused. The feeling's mutual. I didn't get enough out of Marineford either. One condition, you cover your own medical bills. I don't have money to compensate you, old man. Nonsense, Garp barked, chuckling. It's not decided who wins or loses yet. Boom. A shockwave of power tore through the summit of the nearby mountain. The peak shattered as if struck by a cannon. Slabs of rock exploded outward, scattering like a hail of boulders into the storm-dark sky. Garp's silhouette exploded out of the smoke and dust. His fist, nearly the size of a cooking pot, whistled through the air, bearing down on Kale's face. Fist of love, he roared. Kale didn't dodge. He brought his naginata up in a sweeping arc from below, planting the blade so that it met Garp's blow. The Khaleesi released a savage shockwave that smashed outward from the point of contact. The island shuddered under the force. The air tore and howled. The earth cracked open into yawning fissures, and distant trees were uprooted and flung aside. Far out at sea, concealed on a covert world government CP vessel, a squad of black-clad agents peered through high-powered observation scopes, watching the battle unfold. A deep wound split Garp's chest, white shirt ripped away to show bone, and blood splattered across his trademark white coat. He staggered back, coughing, but a broad, almost boyish grin spread across his face. "You bastard kid, you fight dirty," he said, still laughing. "The feeling's mutual," Kale replied. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, internal damage clear in the way his shoulders trembled, but he forced himself to stand tall, to make the pain look real. It had to be convincing. On the CP ship, the men and women at the scopes fell silent, stunned by what they were seeing. "Vice Admiral Garp," one agent breathed, barely louder than the wind, the name a mix of awe and alarm. "Is he injured?" someone shouted. "That wave motion king? Could he really wound a marine hero?" Kale drew a deep breath and raised his sword until the blade pointed at the sky. The air and the very ground of the island began to vibrate at an unnatural frequency. "Garp, take this, my final move," he yelled. A searing orb of destructive energy coalesced at the blade's tip, radiating a space-warping aura. Garp's face went deadly serious. He braced himself and poured every scrap of hockey into his right fist. "Come on, kid," he roared. The collision detonated in a light brighter than the sun. The flash swallowed the whole island. A towering mushroom cloud erupted into the sky. When the light finally faded, the little island had been wiped off the charts. Only a bottomless whirlpool and a field of floating wreckage marked where it had been. Gasping and coughing, Garp surfaced from the water. He stared out toward the spot where Kale had vanished and let loose a furious, bone-deep roar. "You bastard! This old man will never let you go!" The cry rolled across the empty sea and hung there long after he fell silent. Kale, meanwhile, deserved an Oscar for the theatrics. 117. Onion. Orange. Onion. Orange. According to a classified world government report, Marine hero Monkey D. Garp clashed in a lethal showdown with the Wave Motion King, Aaron Kale, on the Grand Line, while pursuing the widow and bloodline of Roger. In the end, the island sank under Kale's strange powers, and the target was taken off the island by Kale, whereabouts unknown. Garp kept his station. Kale shouldered the brunt of the investigation, though in truth, it barely troubled him. While the Marines chased shadows, the real key figure quietly began a new life in the least likely of places. After drifting at sea for a few more days, Kale grew tired of the vagabond existence. Freedom had its perks, but constant wandering brought its own troubles. It was time to settle down. He chose the Sabaody archipelago. A thicket of gigantic Yarukiman mangroves, Sabaody marks the end of the first half of the Grand Line and the only gateway to the New World. It's a melting pot where every sort of person and information flows freely, a place where a fragile balance between order and chaos is carefully maintained. And, not incidentally, he he might end up being neighbors with Rayleigh. Cale walked across the islands dotted with shimmering bubbles until he stopped in front of a detached villa in the 24th Grove area. Built into the hillside, the place had a broad, commanding view and a grand, imposing design. Several burly men, clearly not someone to trifle with, stood guard at the gate. It was obvious this belonged to some underworld faction. Cale smiled and strolled up to the entrance. "This villa is mine. Any objections?" he asked. "Hold it, kid, you don't belong here," growled a scarred guard, stepping forward and spreading his arm to block him. Cale didn't bother to look at him. He just kept walking. The guard's face turned red. "You're asking for death." He lunged, throwing a fist as huge as a cooking pot straight for Cale's face. The punch stopped less than a centimeter from Cale's nose, not because the guard held back, but because an invisible shockwave rolled out from under Cale's feet. The 200-kilogram muscleman was flung backward like a fly swatted by an unseen hand, screaming as he smashed into a distant wall and crumpled unconscious. The other guards froze, eyes wide, jawing in disbelief. No one moved to follow. "A black hand! Let me make you fly!" Those cries echoed behind him, but Cale didn't slow. He walked straight through the chaos as if nothing could touch him. The commotion quickly alerted everyone inside the villa. The main gate was thrown open with a crash, and a man in a flashy suit bounded out ahead of a cluster of henchmen, his lower jaw replaced by polished steel that flashed in the sunlight. "Who dares make trouble on my turf, Iron Jaw Karen?" the man bellowed, his voice booming. Cale paused and took him in. "Your turf?" he asked, tilting his head, voice cool. "Not anymore." Karen laughed as if he'd been told the best joke he'd ever heard. His men snickered and started drawing their weapons. "You insolent brat! Tear him apart and feed him to the Sea Kings!" Karen roared. One of the smaller lieutenants lunged forward, but a thin man with glasses, an obvious strategist, grabbed him back by the collar. The strategist's face was ashen. He trembled so badly his hands shook as he fumbled a crumpled bounty poster from inside his coat and thrust it toward Karen. "Boss, you have to see this." Karen snatched the bounty poster out of trembling hands. One look at the photograph, and his whole body froze. The man in the picture was the same golden-eyed, black-haired youth standing before him. Wave Motion King, Aaron Cale, bounty 3.1 billion berries. The cigar fell from Karen's mouth with a clatter. His proud steel jaw creaked as if it might drop too. The arrogant gang boss of a moment ago suddenly went rigid, his legs giving out. With a thud, he collapsed to his knees and slammed his forehead against the floor in a full prostration. "Lord Cale, I was blind. I failed to recognize a gray T-man. I deserve to die. I truly deserve to die." His men, stunned for a second, quickly copied him, scrambling down on their knees in a chaotic, humiliating display. Aaron Cale watched them all bowing and groveling before him, his face unreadable. "I liked the defiant look you had a moment ago," Cale said with a smile. "Get that back." Karen shook violently. Tears streamed down his face as he bowed his head even lower. "I wouldn't dare," he sobbed. "I'll never be insolent again. Take this villa. No, take everything in the entire 24th Grove area. I offer it all to you. Please, have mercy on me." Cale ignored him and strode straight into the villa. "Take your men and leave," he ordered over his shoulder. "Don't let me see any of you again." "Yes, thank you, Cale-sama, for sparing my life," Karen cried. "See?" Cale muttered. "They even have to thank us." A cold voice answered from inside the doorway. Whatever it said, it sounded like a pardon, and Karen scrambled away with his equally terrified subordinates, fleeing in utter disarray. From that day on, the 24th Grove area of the Sabaody archipelago had a new owner. Life finally settled for Cale. He spent most of his time in the villa, venturing out only occasionally to explore and take in the chaotic charms of the archipelago. It didn't take long for him to learn that Iron Jaw, Karen's crew hadn't vanished. They'd simply slipped out of sight but stayed nearby. They had started calling themselves the subordinates of the Wave Motion King, and under that name were behaving like tyrants in other districts. Their reach grew faster than before. Cale had paid little attention to these opportunistic power grabs until one morning when a newspaper caught his eye. The headline announced that Whitebeard, Edward Newgate, had declared Fishman Island under his protection. Cale sat in a lounge chair on the balcony, the paper folded open on his lap. He stared at the photograph of Whitebeard laughing, thinking. A person's strength had limits. Influence, territory, those things could be far more useful than raw power. He needed a place to call his own, somewhere he could always return instead of drifting. Sabaody would be a good choice. A few days later, he sent for Karen. The gang boss's legs trembled on the walk to the villa. He had no idea what he'd done to draw the ire of this so-called god of death this time. "Lord Kale," Karen said, standing rigid in the center of the living room, eyes fixed on the floor. Kale lounged on the sofa, idly turning a teacup between his fingers. "I've been hearing reports," he said, voice easy. "You've been doing quite well lately." A cold sweat broke out across Karen's brow. "It's all thanks to you," he blurted, forcing a bow. "I'm only cleaning up some unwanted filth for you," Karen protested. Kale flicked the rim of his teacup with a fingertip. Crack. The teacup sitting on the coffee table in front of Karen shattered as if it had been struck by a hammer, collapsing into dust. One razor-sharp sliver flew up and lodged in Karen's metal jaw. He went white and dropped to his knees. "My reputation doesn't need to be built on oppressing civilians or running those disgusting slave operations," Kale said, his voice flat and cold. "Starting today, the Sabaody Archipelago's underworld will operate under new rules. My rules." He watched Karen tremble, then spelled them out slowly. "First, human trafficking and slave auctions are forbidden. Absolutely no trading in people in this territory. Second, protection fees may be charged, but only within strict limits. Treat them more like a tax to keep order, not as extortion. If you bleed the flock dry, there's nothing left to reap. Third, Karen will be responsible for mediating all disputes between underworld factions. In Sabaody's underworld, there could only be one voice." Karen listened to the rules laid out before him, utterly bewildered. This wasn't a gang so much as a shadow government. He dared not protest. He nodded like a startled chick, because he knew this was his only chance to survive. And maybe even to prosper. Kale at first had treated Karen as a joke. What could a small gang leader do to impose order on an entire underworld? But Kale's iron-fisted rectification did more than anyone expected. In 2 months, the balance of power in the Sabaody archipelago had been completely rewritten. When Kale finally stepped out of his villa again, the sight at the entrance almost made him think he'd stumbled onto the wrong set. The courtyard was filled with people. Rows of them, all in black suits, dark sunglasses, polished leather shoes, and hair slicked back, so shining it might as well have been a mirror. They stood in disciplined lines on either side of the gate, the villa's entrance as their central axis, tall and rigid, hands clasped behind their backs, faces unreadable. Iron jaw, Karen stood at the very front of the formation in an immaculately tailored black suit. Only his steel jaw caught the sun and gleamed. When Kale emerged, Karen dropped into a full 90-degree bow, his bearing as rigid and deferential as a professional butler's. "Lord Kale, are you going out?" he asked. "Yes, just for a walk." "Understood." Karen snapped to attention and fell into step behind Kale, keeping the exact distance that was neither intrusive nor too far to hear orders. He glanced back and gave a small nod toward the rows of men in black suits behind him. When Kale took a step, nearly 100 of them moved at once. Their motions were flawless and synchronized. The slap of leather against stone swelled into a dull tide, each step striking like the beat of a single giant heart. Kale frowned. Had Karen somehow misunderstood his casual remark? He said nothing and kept walking. Karen, sensing no objection, grew bolder. He cleared his throat. The metallic modification in his neck gave the sound an odd, amplified resonance that carried clearly. "Attention, everyone," he called. "Let's review the core principles of our Sabaody New Order." Kale stumbled, almost tripping on perfectly flat ground. Core principles? What the hell? Karen, however, was delighting in the moment. He began to read aloud in a sharp, rhythmic cadence. First, resolutely implement Kale-sama's core ideology of one center, 2 basic points. The center, maintaining peace and stability in the Sabaody archipelago. The 2 basic points, combating human trafficking and rectifying protection fees, never waver. Nearly 100 men in black suits roared back as one, resolutely implement. The shout made the roadside bubble trees tremble 3 times. Kale stared, inwardly regretting the decision to leave things to a man with a peculiar way of thinking. Karen, sensing approval, grew even more animated. Second, steadily advance Kale-sama's grand strategy of sustainable development. Protection fees are not exploitation. They are taxes. They are the grease that keeps commerce running. We must have merchants pay with peace of mind, comfort, and confidence. Resolutely eliminate short-sighted behavior that wastes resources. The men in black shouted back, "Steadily advance." Kale wanted to hide. Wait, were you a world government official in a past life? He thought. Karen, completely lost in his own sermon, only grew more animated. Third, fully implement Kale-sama's 3 disciplines, 7 degrees. Discipline 1, no oppressing civilians. Discipline 2, no interfering with the slave trade. Discipline 3, internal disputes must be settled internally so as not to affect the city's appearance. Enforce with warmth, pursue with speed, kick with precision, punch with strength, treat others with courtesy, think with depth, and strike with conviction. The men in black bellowed once more. Fully implement. Kale had abandoned any hope of reason. He just wanted to crawl into a hole. When Karen finished the last maxim, they happened to reach an open plaza. Karen stopped, turned to face Kale, and snapped his heels together with a crisp snap. Every man in black behind him snapped to attention in the same instant, their movements startlingly precise, as if measured by a ruler. Karen drew a deep breath, and with everything he had, let out a booming roar. "We pay our highest respects to Kale-sama." He snapped his right arm up, fist clenched, held horizontally across his chest. Nearly 100 people behind him copied the motion exactly. "Loyalty! Loyalty! Loyalty!" Each shout rose louder than the last, combining into a single, resonant wave that seemed to part the clouds above. The raw devotion in their voices charged the air across the plaza. For that moment, they were no longer ragged street thugs, but a disciplined force moving as one. Kale watched the display, part ritual, part performance, and stood silent for a long beat. He had to admit, despite how awkward the whole thing had looked to watch, the effect was impressive. At the very least, it was enough to cow 99% of the riffraff in Sabaody. He turned to Karen, who wore an eager, pleading look. Kale's metal jaw trembled slightly with pleasure. He clapped a hand on Karen's shoulder and let a slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. "Little Karen? Here?" Karen dropped into a deeper bow, chest pressed forward, ready for whatever came next. "Well done," Kale said evenly, his voice betraying nothing. "It's just after that walk your trousers look a bit loose." Karen froze. "What?" He glanced down at his dress pants. The waistband was tied perfectly. How could they be loose? Was Kale implying his outfit was improper? Cold sweat broke out on his forehead as his mind raced, searching for some hidden meaning. Kale watched him puzzle it out, an amused smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. He extended a finger and made a teasing motion toward Karen's waist, as if hitching up an invisible waistband. "You should pull them up." "Then the music, then the dancing," Kyle repeated. Karen snapped his head up and met Kyle's golden eyes. There was a faint smile there, not a trace of blame, only a quiet encouragement and approval. Years in the underworld had sharpened Karen's instincts. He could read people like a book. In an instant, he understood the deeper meaning behind Kyle's words. It wasn't about the pants, it was about the position. A rush of euphoria washed over him so strong it nearly drowned his reason. His whole body trembled with excitement. He dropped to his knees again with a thud, but this time it wasn't fear that bent him, it was gratitude and fierce loyalty. "Lord Kyle!" His voice broke on the name. A sob crept in. The clang of his steel jaw struck the stone beneath him. "Your humble servant Karen will go through fire and water for you, even if it means dying 10,000 times. Kyle watched him with satisfaction and gave a small nod. "All right, get up. Don't kneel at every turn. It ruins the view." He waved a hand and turned toward the villa. "From now on, all the unsavory business on Xiangbo Island is your responsibility. Don't disappoint me, and don't disgrace yourself." "Yes! Yes!" "I guarantee the mission will be completed." Karen scrambled to his feet and dropped into a deep 90-degree bow toward Kyle's retreating back. Only after Kyle had vanished through the villa's front doors did Karen slowly straighten. The ingratiating smile melted away, replaced by a severity none of them had ever seen from him. He turned to face the silent ranks of men in black behind him. "Did you all hear that?" "Yes." Nearly 100 voices answered in perfect unison, loud and urgent. Karen drew a breath. His voice came out low and metallic. From this day forward, we are no longer street thugs, no longer racketeers collecting protection money. We are the upholders of the new order on Xiangbo Island. We are Lord Kyle's direct men. Throw off your old ways. If anyone dares to use Lord Kyle's name to bully the innocent or drag his name through the mud, you won't have to wait for the Marines to act. I, Ironjaw, will snap his head off myself. Remember this, we are people who follow rules now. Kyle's gamble had paid off. Karen, who had spent most of his life as a street thug, proved to be something else entirely once given a chance. Not a brute, but a strategist. There's a saying that a golden phoenix never grows up in a chicken coop, but a phoenix had just risen out of the gutter. Karen was mediocre with a knife and a fist, but when it came to organization, structure, and management, he was uncanny. Kyle had seen it in him, and after formally authorizing Karen to run things, Karen ran with it like a man possessed. He called his new code the 3 Main Disciplines and 7 Degrees. The name sounded ceremonious, but the content was pure bureaucracy and brilliance. He drafted internal regulations, drew up hierarchical charts, and built a KPI system so precise it bordered on obsessive. Every crew had responsibilities, measurable targets, and regular performance reviews. Crime, for the first time under their roof, had metrics. Some of the changes were blunt and merciless. Human trafficking, anyone found involved would be executed. Their entire family would be dragged down with them. Karen worded it in the sort of cold simplicity that left no room for argument. That particular line would not be crossed. It was both a moral stance and a practical move, an explicit ironclad prohibition that removed the dirtiest, most damaging activities from the ledger. Other reforms looked, awkwardly, like corporate housekeeping. Protection fees were rebranded as community security management fees. Instead of arbitrary levies collected at someone's doorstep, there was now a tiered schedule keyed to shop turnover and square footage, printed rate cards, and standardized invoices. There were quarterly packages and annual membership discounts because Karen had discovered, to the bewilderment of his lieutenants, that subscription models reduced conflict. Receipts were issued and filed. Disputes about overcharging could be appealed to an internal committee. This alone, transforming extortion into a transparent contractual service, reduced friction, complaints, and the kind of small grudges that escalated into street wars. Territory disputes, historically the bloodiest of disagreements, were handled with a similarly bureaucratic cool. Karen established a neutral arbitration panel, senior lieutenants, a representative of Kyle's office, and one of the older, respected shopkeepers who had survived the old days. Claims had to be documented, maps, foot traffic estimates, sales reports. A scoring system determined whether a newcomer could operate in a given block, what percentage of resources they would be allowed to deploy, and what fees, if any, were fair. Enforcement had teeth. Violators lost privileges, were fined heavily, and, in the worst cases, were driven out. But the panel's decisions were binding and, in time, grudgingly accepted. Karen's obsession with measurement extended to mundane things. He instituted monthly audits, not just of cash flow, but of manpower allocation, watch rotations, and even the cleanliness of safe houses. Performance dashboards went up on bulletin boards, roster adherence, incident response times, complaint rates from merchants, and a status column for ongoing negotiations. He introduced training for junior men, conflict de-escalation, bookkeeping basics, how to handle the Marines if they showed up. He appointed a small team whose only job was reputation management. They soothed ruffled feathers among merchants, arranged to fix broken windows after fights, and made sure there were always quick apologies where an apology could do the work of blood. The lieutenants gaped. Some mumbled that what they were setting up sounded like a company with a name and a crest. Karen's smile didn't ease their discomfort. Names only matter if you do things properly, he said. If we want space to operate, if we want people to come to us instead of running to the Marines, then you deliver a service they can't get elsewhere. You're not doing them favors, you're offering stability. And stability meant profit without the chaos. It also meant fewer nights spent dodging patrols and more predictability. Merchants who had learned to fear a random beating now found they could buy a quarterly security package that promised a specific number of patrols per week and a hotline to call if a pickpocket showed up. Those who paid got protection. Those who didn't were protected by the law Karen had enforced internally. They would get the minimum necessary and the maximum consequence for inciting trouble, not because it was personal, but because unpredictability cost everyone money. In the office where Karen worked, an old storefront papered with flowcharts and ledgers, men who had once settled grievances with knives now argued about margins and inventory turnover. They debated whether a percentage should be calculated on gross or net receipts. They timed patrols to peak foot traffic and swapped notes on how to present the fee schedule in a way that made it sound like a community service. Kyle watched all of this silently, his earlier faith vindicated. The underworld, under the right hand, could be made efficient. The change wasn't instantaneous, and it wasn't unopposed. Old rivals mocked the new rules as a softening of muscle. Some in Karen's own ranks chafed at the audits and the discipline. A few pushed back hard enough to earn the fate Karen promised for traffickers, a swift, public end. But the majority, when they counted coins in clean ledgers and saw fewer nights spent in lockups or hospital wards, adapted. News of the transformation spread. Merchants talked. The Marines took notice. Where before Kyle's name had been a threat that invited retaliation from the state, now it became a brand. Messy, certainly, but with the promise of order. Karen had not just reorganized a gang, he had repackaged it into an organization that could be relied upon. The old chaos still lingered at the edges, but inside the walls Karen carved out, rules reigned. Remember this, he repeated to the men at the end of that first month, the maps and ledgers behind him like a war room backdrop. We are people who follow rules now. Keep the rules and you'll survive. Break them, and I'll be the first to break you. It was brutal, it was practical, and it worked. The Xiangbo Islands Commercial Dispute Arbitration Tribunal had been established, with Karen installed personally as chief arbitrator. Disputes were settled over tea. Both sides would sit down, present the facts and their arguments, and the tribunal would rule. Those who refused to cooperate were simply persuaded by other means until they did. In a matter of months, the island's underworld changed almost overnight. Street brawls all but vanished, serious incidents dropped sharply, and even the boldest pirates learned to think twice before stirring trouble. Rumor had it that anyone who caused a public disturbance would be sewn into a sack and dumped at the bottom of the sea the next day. Merchants, for their part, found it oddly beneficial. Many were paying less than before, yet the so-called protection they received was far more comprehensive and reliable. At the center of it all was the legendary pirate known as the Wave Motion King. He kept to himself, rarely showing his face in public, which only added to his mystique. Whatever force had brought order to the islands seemed to flow from him, even if he remained hidden. That afternoon, Kyle lounged on a chair out on the balcony, soaking up a rare patch of warm sunlight. Karen arrived at the appointed time, immaculate in a black suit, a thick folder clutched in his hands. He stopped a respectful distance away and waited, as if ready to report or to be dismissed, businesslike, quiet, and watchful. Lord Kyle, here's the business summary for last quarter and the 5-year development plan for the next phase. Please review it. Kyle didn't even lift an eyelid. Read it. Yes. Karen cleared his throat and opened the folder. Reporting, my lord. Last quarter, we completely dismantled 17 human trafficking strongholds across the archipelago and rescued more than 300 victims. Income from community security management fees rose 30% compared to pre-reform levels, and merchant complaints fell by 90%. He rattled off statistics with the smooth confidence of a seasoned bureaucrat, clear, logical, and unrelentingly detailed. Kyle felt his eyes grow heavy. If anyone deserved to be a civil official in the world government, it was this man. It was almost a shame his talent was being used elsewhere. In summary, for the next phase, our core objective is to establish the Xiangbo Islands Orphanage to house and train rescued children uniformly, selecting those with talent and willingness to be integrated into our organization to ensure sustainable personnel development. Stop. Kyle finally opened his eyes. He sat up and looked at the expectant Karen. You certainly know how to find things for me to do. I wouldn't dream of it, Karen said, bowing quickly. This is all in service of implementing your great strategy of sustainable development. Kyle sighed. Apparently Karen treated his offhand remarks like commandments. Fine, handle these matters yourself. Don't come to me about every little thing. Yes! Karen's face lit up at the approval. Oh, one more thing, my lord. He clapped his hands, and the villa's door swung open on silent hinges. 2 girls in black and white maid outfits glided in, heads bowed, following close behind. They were twins, no older than 15 or 16, with matching short, cherry-colored hair and delicate features. The only difference between them was expression. One wore a spark of mischief in her eyes and a faint, knowing smile. The other kept her lips pressed in a hard line, distant and unreadable. Kyle's brow tightened. What is the meaning of this? His voice was level, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Karen's heart sank. He must have misunderstood, and a cold sweat broke out along his spine. Please, my lord, don't be angry. They are not merchandise. Absolutely not, Kyle said sharply. Karen hurried to explain. They were rescued during our raid on the last slave auction. Their towns were wiped out in the war, and they're homeless now. I meant to send them to an orphanage, but... He trailed off and glanced at the 2 girls. The livelier of the pair swallowed her fear, lifted her chin, and spoke clearly. We came here willingly to serve you, my lord. Mr. Karen told us you ordered our rescue, that you brought new laws to the Xiangbo Islands, and that you are the son of the islands. We have nowhere else to go, and we don't want to return to that sea that eats people. We only want to stay where we feel safe and do something for you to repay your kindness. The quieter girl at her side nodded. She said nothing, but the earnestness in her eyes was plain. Kyle studied them for a moment, sensing the brittle uncertainty of people who had just survived catastrophe and had no idea what their future might hold. He was silent, then asked, What are your names? The lively girl answered at once. My name is Sakura. She's my little sister, Belle. Sakura burst out, stepping in front of the younger girl. Sakura, Belle. Kyle nodded once. I don't take in freeloaders, and I don't keep servants. If you want to stay, you'll have to earn it. So tell me, what can you do? Sakura thought for a second, then puffed out her small chest. I can clean. I can give massages. And my sister Belle, she makes really delicious pastries. Belle's cheeks flushed, and she gave a soft hum of agreement. Kyle waved a hand toward the doorway. All right, you can go. I'll take them. Yes, Karen practically beamed, as if he'd been granted a sudden pardon. He bowed low and slipped out, heart swelling with relief and a resolve to get stronger. Kyle sent Sakura and Belle off to tidy the room, then sank back into his chair and closed his eyes. He felt calm, on the verge of amused. Pretty faces, he thought, were ultimately nothing but dust. A pretty woman wasn't going to shake his iron will. Men like him didn't fall for those traps. At most, a pretty face might change how quickly he reached for his sword. Half an hour later, Kyle reclined in the chair, Sakura's small, skillful hands kneading his temples while Belle peeled crystal grapes one by one and fed them to him. The sun was perfect and a soft breeze ruffled the sails. He opened his mouth for a grape and let out a contented sigh. Ah, how decadent. On the Oro Jackson, it was always something else. Fighting each other, arm wrestling, a bunch of big men making a racket. When had they ever had the chance to enjoy such comforts? Karen, Kyle called, half teasing, are you testing your captain? What superior officer could stand up to a trial like this? He grinned. What's the problem? I've been fighting and killing on the seas for decades. Can't I have a little pleasure now? Keep the music going. Keep the dancing coming. Chapter 119. Let go of the desire to help others and respect their fate. April 5th. Listening to music in a brothel, crossed out, chilling. April 7, chilling. April 8, chilling. Sakura's hands are soft. Of course I mean her hands. April 9, chill. Oh no, how can I be like this? I need to practice my sword. April 10, chilling. Suzu's usually cool and aloof, but she looks so cute when she's shy. April 11, chilling. April 12, flat. Early morning sunlight poured through the huge floor-to-ceiling windows. The 2 little maids, Sakura and Suzu, had everything ready. On his left, Sakura handed him a cup of red tea at the perfect temperature. On his right, Suzu carried a plate of delicate pastries, newly baked and still steaming. Behind him, cushions were being constantly adjusted until they sat at the most comfortable angle. Kyle squinted into the light, feeling like he might melt from the comfort. If this kept up, he doubted he'd even feel like getting up from the lounge chair, much less unsheathing his sword. Sigh. He let out a long breath, heavy with regret at his own weakness. Lord Kyle, didn't you like today's snack? Suzu tilted her head, worry touching the cool composure of her face. Kyle waved a hand weakly. No, the snacks were fine. He managed a small, distracted smile. It's me. I'm the problem. The room swam for a moment with memories. Days aboard the Oro Jackson flickered before him. Easy conversations with Rayleigh, wild nights Roger dragged him into, and rough sparring matches with Jabba. Back then he'd been reckless and alive. Now he felt like a feudal lord, hollowed out by wine, women, and wealth, soft and drifting through his hours. That realization sat like a stone in his chest. He couldn't keep going like this. Kyle's eyes opened with sudden clarity. He pushed himself upright so abruptly that Sakura and Suzu jumped. Lord? Sakura's voice was small with concern. I have to go out for a while. Kyle stood, stretching his stiff muscles. I'll leave things in your care, both of you, and Karen. A sharp image flickered through his mind, the timeline he'd been holding on to. Around this point, Mariah would be approaching the worst calamity of his life in Wano country. Back then, that man had been a confident, spirited captain, certain of his crew and his strength, already planning to take on Kaido the Beasts entrenched in Wano. In Kyle's memory, the challenge ended in catastrophe. Mariah's crew was wiped out by Kaido, and he himself suffered a crushing defeat. Kyle pushed the thought away and turned to the door. There was work to be done. After that, he never recovered. He'd become a gloomy, reclusive, corpulent figure holed up on thriller bark, raising a zombie army with shadows, more a cautionary tale than an inspiration. Kyle stroked his chin. Karen was excellent with internal affairs and keeping the crew in line, but when it came to fighting, he was lacking. If Kyle wanted his power to grow, he needed a few strong, resilient faces to represent it. Rescuing Mariah before he retreated completely, and seeing whether he had any promising subordinates worth keeping, seemed prudent. His expression darkened. Wano country. Kozuki Oden. He wondered how the man he'd drunk and adventured with aboard Roger's ship was faring. When they'd parted ways, Kyle had warned him that Wano's waters were far deeper and more dangerous than they looked. He hoped the naive samurai had taken at least some of that warning to heart. Karen? Kyle's voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the whole villa. In less than 10 seconds, Karen swept in like a gust of wind and dropped into a perfect 90-degree bow. Lord Kyle! What are your orders? I'll be away for a while, anywhere from a few months to indefinitely. Kyle's voice was clipped and final. You'll keep running the household as usual, and look after those 2 girls. Yes, rest assured, my lord. I will serve you with my whole life. I swear on my honor to protect your estate, Karen replied, every bit as ceremonious and fervent as ever. Kyle offered no more pleasantries. Having given his instructions, he walked to the balcony. The floor trembled beneath his feet as a faint shockwave rippled outward. In the next instant, he was a streak of light, shooting up into the sky and vanishing over the horizon. 3 people were left standing in the villa, staring after him. Sakura and Suzu's eyes glittered with admiration. Karen clenched his fists and shouted once more, voice ringing through the courtyard, Farewell, Lord Kyle. The far half of the Grand Line, the New World. A pirate ship with a fanged skull flag glided along the swell under a high blue sky. On deck, a gang of pirates drank and boasted, the air thick with laughter and the clink of coin. Captain, we hit the jackpot this time. After looting that little kingdom, we've got enough gold and silver to live like kings for years, one of them crowed. Ha! The captain roared, slapping the rail. Around him, the crew whooped and raised their cups, the ship cutting through the waves as their celebration rolled on. That's right. When we reach the next island, I'm going to find the most beautiful women and drink the strongest liquor. A figure dropped out of the blue and landed lightly on the bow railing with a soft thud. The sound snapped every head around to look. Who? The burly captain jerked to his feet. Kyle didn't answer. He casually inspected the ship's build with a critical eye. Solid timber, well-rigged, more than sturdy enough for his purposes. Hey, kid, how did you get on board? the captain barked, drawing his scimitar and pointing it at him. Kyle finally turned, extended a single finger, and the man never had a chance to react. An invisible, irresistible force struck the captain in the chest. He was sent flying like a kite with a broken string, skittering across dozens of meters of deck and landing in the sea with barely more than a splash. Silence fell like a blanket over the deck. Bottles and weapons clattered to wood as the pirates froze, faces drained of color. Kyle clapped once, as if he had only tied his shoe. "All right," he said, "now the direction is right." He shifted his grip on the railing, changed the ship's course, and turned to the terrified crew with a deceptively gentle smile. "Destination, Wano country. Gentlemen, any objections?" The pirates shook their heads so violently their heads bobbed like rattles. "No objections," the captain called. "Very well, set sail." Kyle smiled to himself. "I'm a remnant of the old era. In the new world, I'll ride on whatever ship I please." A few days later, the cutter slipped into a secluded harbor. He didn't bother the crew any further. After a quick nod of thanks, he stepped off alone onto unfamiliar shore. Wano was unlike anywhere he'd seen. The buildings had an unmistakable, old-fashioned flair. Sweeping roofs, lacquered wood, paper lanterns swaying in the wind. Men moved through the streets in kimono, long swords at their hips. The air itself felt heavy with tradition, almost oppressive. Kyle wandered into a small town and ducked into a roadside noodle shop. "Boss, 1 bowl of tempura soba," he called. "Right away. Please wait," the proprietor replied, bustling behind the counter. The shop wasn't busy. At the next table, 2 ronin, rough-haired and travel-worn, nursed cups of sake and traded complaints in low voices. Kyle ate slowly, listening. "Did you hear?" one muttered, disgust clear in his tone. "Tomorrow's that damn Lord's dancing day again." The other snorted. "Ha, of course I heard. Been 2 years, hasn't it?" Kyle kept his head down and chewed, letting the words hang in the air. The conversation hinted at local grievances and rituals he hadn't yet earned the right to understand, and Wano's strange customs already felt like the first thread in some larger tapestry he'd have to unravel. "Once a week, without fail. What a joke Wano has become," one samurai crowed. The others at the table burst out laughing, and a few nearby groups snickered along. Someone hissed, "Shh! Keep your voices down. Don't let the red-scabbard samurai, I hear you." "What's there to be afraid of? They're nothing but a pack of stray dogs now," another replied. "Following that idiot around all day, they've lost whatever samurai dignity they had." "That's right. Lord Odin used to be a hero, but look at him now. Sigh. The Kozuki name has been ruined by him alone." "You can say that again. They say he does it all for the people, protecting the common folk. What a load of nonsense. I'd call him a coward clinging to life." A silenced murmur passed through the room, and then a memory drifted through someone's mind. "Odin, remember, constant concession and compromise don't always bring peace. Sometimes they only make the enemy bolder. There are foes who won't be swayed by reason or sincerity." Laughter followed that recollection. "Ha ha! Kyle, you worry too much," came Odin's booming reply in the memory. "As long as I'm strong, I can protect everything. I am Kozuki Odin." Kyle's patience with fools snapped. Something about the pitiable always invites scorn. In a place like this, truth is dangerous. If the wrong people learn it in the morning, you might be dead by night. If you'd gone back to Wano that morning, found Kaido by noon, you could have taken him down by night. And yet you're telling me you came back with a missing hand after facing 2 kings and 4 twos? If it was truly impossible, why didn't you call for help? What were the Roger and Whitebeard pirates for, if not that? You didn't have to make yourself into some legendary martyr, a human sacrifice like Odin. Enough. Forget it. Kyle did everything he could. Odin chose his own fate. Let go of the savior complex and respect other people's destinies. Chapter 120. "Look back, idiot! Look back, idiot!" The thought kept looping in Kyle's head as his boots made a soft crunch against the thick snow. Wano Country's Ringo region lay under a permanent blanket of ice and frost, an expanse whispered about as a graveyard for the dead. The air bit at his face. Each breath felt as if it might turn to glass. He had bought a flask of hot sake in town and tucked it inside his coat, where it radiated a small, grateful warmth. Following the mountain's incline, Kyle found a large rock with a perfect view and sat down cross-legged. Below, the snowfield spread out in a wide, flat white plain. Two groups stood facing one another, separated by a tense, visible gap, their hostility so sharp it seemed to stop the snowflakes mid-fall. Kyle uncorked the sake gourd and took a long swig. The spicy heat slid down his throat and pushed back some of the cold. He then pulled out the Odin he'd bought, speared a tender piece of daikon with a bamboo stick, and watched the lines below with leisurely interest. On the left, a banner marked with a bat and bared fangs flew above a compact formation. Its leader was unmistakable, tall and thin, clad in a stylish black leather jacket, his purple hair wild and unruly, a look of untamed confidence carved into his face. Gecko Moria. He wasn't yet the corpulent, indolent giant he would one day become. His eyes still held ambition, and he carried the sharp, uncompromising bearing of a captain. He had stumbled before and made his share of mistakes, but he had never once backed down. Behind him, though, his crew told a different story. Each man looked fierce enough on his own, but their equipment was mismatched and their formation loose, more a hastily gathered rabble than a disciplined force. To the right, an oppressive presence seared through the air, noticeable even from hundreds of meters away. The man at its heart wore a plain green shirt, his forearms were thick with muscle, and he gripped a spiked club. Two horn-like protrusions crowned his head, and every line of him radiated raw authority. Kaido. Standing a few paces behind Kaido were three other figures who cut equally striking silhouettes. King Wildfire wore a black mask and bore dark wings that gave him a grim, foreboding air. Queen Plague had a large belly, a coiffed topknot, and a cigar perpetually clamped between his teeth, the picture of a world-weary libertine. And Jack Drought still had something boyish about his face, a faint trace of youth that didn't suit the devastation he carried. The three of them together, the disasters. Mariah's face lit up with savage delight. Energy and ambition danced in his eyes like twin flames. He laughed, low, hungry, unrestrained. Jehe! Kaido! Lay down your lives and become the stepping stones for my rise to the throne. Kyle watched the ragged crew gathered behind Mariah and felt a cold twinge of disbelief. A few of them looked capable, but against the three titans arrayed across from them, they were nothing. Fireflies beneath a full moon. How was this fight supposed to be won? Was the captain expected to stand alone? Urororo! Kaido's laugh rolled across the snow like distant thunder as he pointed the tip of his spiked kanabo at Mariah. Is that all you've got, Mariah? And you expect this rabble to stand with you? The New World is no place for a stage troupe of pirates. Enough talk, Mariah snarled, drawing his sword and leveling the blade at Kaido. They are not trash. My comrades will stand, and we will take Wano. The men behind him answered with a roar that shook the cliffside, their voices catching something of their captain's fever. For Captain Mariah! For Wano! Destroy the beast pirates! Kyle, perched above them, shook his head. War wasn't decided by bravado. He could see the conviction in their faces, but resolve alone wouldn't topple those monsters. Charge! Kaido's irritation vanished in an instant. He threw himself forward, too impatient for any more words. His enormous bulk thundered across the snow, each stride making the earth shudder. My lads, he bellowed, leading the onslaught. Let them see what we're capable of. Mariah snapped, not to be outdone. He lifted his massive blade and charged. Amid the swirling snow, the two pirate crews slammed into each other with a thunderous roar. Clang! Mariah's great sword met Kaido's spiked club in a collision that sent sparks scattering into the white air. A visible white shockwave burst from the point of impact, whipping the snow up several meters and turning the battlefield into a drifting curtain. Behind that veil, Mariah's forearm veins stood out like cords. The confident smirk he'd worn moments before had been replaced by a strained grimace. He felt less like he was fighting a man and more like he was slamming his blade against a mountain. Ororororo, Kaido bellowed, his laugh rolling like thunder even as he taunted. What's wrong, Moria? Is that the best you've got? Before the words finished, Kaido suddenly tightened his wrist and drove force through his club. An irresistible power shoved through the contact point, and Mariah was flung backward as if struck by a tidal wave, their boots carving two deep furrows in the snow and scattering broken gravestones until he finally skidded to a halt. He broke into a crazed chuckle. Jah! A wild grin spread across his face. Now that's more like it. It wouldn't be any fun to kill you if you were too weak. Between the two captains, the fight was evenly matched. Mariah's sword work was sweeping and brutal, each arc of steel cutting the air with a razor bite. Kaido's attacks, by contrast, were concentrated and absolute. Every strike packed the kind of force that could tear the world apart. Their duel was nothing but raw power colliding. The sky darkened, and the snowfields itself trembled under the impact. But beyond that single clash, the rest of the battlefield was a different story. King, the wildfire, snapped his wings open and became a black streak of motion, plunging straight into the ranks of Mariah's pirates. He didn't even draw his blade. He simply flashed through them so fast that any man struck by those wings instantly erupted in unquenchable flame, screams swallowed by the roar as they writhed in the snow and were reduced to charred husks. Queen, the plague, took a more languid approach. He produced 2 massive Gatling guns from behind him and with casual relish swept them across the crowd in a relentless barrage. "Feel the pain," he hollered as the bullets tore into the formation. A voice cut through the air. "You scum!" Then bullets poured down like a summer storm. Mariah's men fell in waves, toppled like mown wheat, their blood darkening the pristine snow almost as soon as it hit. The youngest of the 3 disasters, Jack, called Drought, moved with a cruelty that didn't belong to someone his age. He charged through the ranks, swinging his weapon in wide arcs that took several lives with every blow. Mariah's pirates, once so proud of their captain and comrades, tried to rally and stop him, but they were paper against the 3 disasters. In a single sweep, they were annihilated. It was a massacre. High on the cliff, Kyle watched in silence. He had to admit Mariah was powerful. Standing toe-to-toe with Kaido proved the man had the raw strength to become a top-tier force at sea. But he'd made a fatal error. He'd trusted his crew too much, or, more precisely, he hadn't understood that those he called comrades were of wildly differing ability. He'd led a flock of sheep into a den of beasts and expected them to stand and fight. A coarse, triumphant laugh echoed across the frozen field. "Geh!" came the sound, followed by a shout, "Kaido!" "You're nothing special," Mariah shouted. In the center of the battlefield, he drove Kaido back with a single sword strike, laughter ringing out as if in triumph. He seemed completely unaware of the carnage unfolding behind him. His whole world narrowed to this duel. He believed that if he defeated Kaido, the war would end. Kaido, pushed backward by Mariah's blade, didn't answer with anger. He laughed louder. "Urororo, you should look behind you first, idiot!" At that, Mariah glanced over his shoulder. The smile on his face disappeared in an instant.